This is the story of Sumer, the first civilization. It started 6,500 years ago between two rivers in what's now Iraq. Back then, it was just marshland. Wandering tribes followed the water. They noticed something. Every spring, when the rivers flooded, they left behind black soil, rich soil, perfect for growing food. So they stopped wandering. They built small houses from river reeds, made simple tools, planted barley. And for the first time in human history, strangers became neighbours. By 3500 BCE, these little villages had grown into something new. Cities. Real cities with thousands of people, Uruk, Ura Eridu. They figured out how to live together, how to share water, how to trade, how to write things down. They were making it up as they went along. Nobody had done this before. They were writing the first draft of civilization. Around 5000 BCE, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates was nothing special. Just wetlands, marsh, the kind of place you'd pass through, not settle down. But something was changing. The climate was getting stable. For the first time in thousands of years, the floods came predictably. Same time every year, same strength. The Ubaid people noticed this first. They were nomads, following their sheep and goats from pasture to pasture. But they kept coming back to this marshy land. Why? Because after every flood, the soil turned black. Not brown like regular dirt. Black. And anything planted in that black soil grew like crazy. So they tried something new. Instead of moving on, they stayed. Just for one season at first. They built simple houses from mud bricks and river reeds. Nothing fancy. Just 4 walls and a roof. But it was enough to store grain. Enough to stay warm in winter. Enough to call it home. The first permanent settlement we know about was a place called Tel al-Ubaid. The name means mound of the small hill. Not very poetic, but accurate, because that's what these early towns became, mounds. Every time a house fell down, they'd build a new one on top. Layer after layer, century after century, creating artificial hills that archaeologists dig through today. Life was simple but hard. Men hunted and fished. Women gathered plants and figured out which ones were worth growing. And here's something interesting. It was probably the women who invented agriculture. They knew plants. They knew seasons. They knew which seeds to save and when to plant them. While men were off hunting animals that might or might not be there, women were creating reliable food sources right outside their doors. The first farms were tiny, maybe an acre or two. They grew barley mostly, some wheat. Lots of dates from palm trees. They learned to dig small channels from the river to their fields. Nothing complex, just ditches really. But those ditches changed everything. For the first time, humans weren't just taking what nature gave them. They were directing it, controlling it. By 4500 BCE, these settlements had grown. What started as extended families became villages, maybe 50 people, then 100, then 500. And something unexpected happened. When you live with that many people, family rules aren't enough anymore. You need something else, laws, leaders, ways to settle disputes between strangers. They developed simple councils, usually older men and women who'd lived long enough to know what worked and what didn't. These councils decided things like who got water first during dry spells, who owned which fields, what to do when someone stole grain. Basic stuff, but revolutionary for its time, because it meant people who weren't related by blood could live together peacefully. The archaeological evidence from this period is fascinating. We find pottery decorated with geometric patterns, simple but beautiful. We find clay tokens used for counting, little cones and spheres that represented sheep, grain, oil, the beginning of mathematics. We find children's toys, dolls made from clay, tiny wheeled animals, proof that even 6,000 years ago kids were kids. But the most important discovery from this period isn't an object, it's an absence. There are no weapons, no fortifications, no evidence of warfare. For nearly 1,000 years, these early settlements lived in peace. They were too busy figuring out farming to fight each other, too focused on survival to wage war. The climate data tells us why this worked. Between 5000 and 4000 BCE, Mesopotamia experienced something rare: stability. The same amount of rain each year, the same flood patterns, the same temperatures. It was like nature was giving humanity a practice period, a chance to figure out civilization while conditions were perfect. This couldn't last forever. By 4000 BCE, populations were growing, resources were getting scarce, different groups were competing for the best land. The simple village life was ending. But those Ubaid people had laid the foundation. They'd proven humans could settle down, could farm, could live in groups larger than extended families. They'd answered the first big question of civilization: can we stop wandering? The answer was yes. But that created a new question. If we're going to live together in one place, how exactly do we do that? How do we organize thousands of people who don't know each other? How do we prevent chaos? The answer to that question would come from a place called Uruk, a settlement that was about to become something the world had never seen before. A city. A real city with temples and markets and districts and strangers living side by side. The Ubaid period was ending. The urban revolution was about to begin, and once it started there was no going back. Humanity had chosen its path. We were going to be city builders, town dwellers, civilization creators. The quiet farming villages along the rivers were about to transform into something louder, messier, and infinitely more complex. The age of cities was dawning, and with it would come everything we associate with civilization. Writing, law, trade, war, power, inequality, art, science, all of it traceable back to this moment when villages started becoming something more. Uruk started as nothing special. Just 5 small villages clustered near a bend in the Euphrates. Each had maybe 200 people. Farmers mostly, some potters, a few fishermen. But around 4000 BCE, something strange happened. The villages started growing toward each other, like they were being pulled by an invisible force. Within a few centuries, the space between them filled up. Houses connected to houses. Streets formed without planning. Just paths that people walked every day until they became permanent. And suddenly, around 3800 BCE, those 5 villages weren't villages anymore. They were one place, one community, the world's first real city. The numbers are staggering. By 3500 BCE, Uruk had 5,000 people. That might not sound like much today, but back then, no one had ever seen that many humans in one place. Think about it. For all of human history, people lived in groups of maybe 150. That's the most faces you can remember, the most relationships you can track. But Uruk shattered that limit. Most people you passed on the street were strangers, and somehow that worked. The center of the city was the temple district. 2 massive complexes, the Anu temple dedicated to the sky god, and the Yana temple, home of Inanna, goddess of love and war. These weren't just places to pray, they were the heart of everything. Banks, warehouses, administrative centers. The temples owned land. Lots of land. They employed thousands of people. Farmers, craftsmen, scribes, priests. If you lived in Uruk, your life probably revolved around one of these temples. The priests were the first managers. They had to be. When you're feeding 5,000 people, you can't just hope everything works out. You need systems. So they created them. Work schedules, food distribution, tax collection, all run from the temples. Every morning workers would line up for assignments. Farm this field, fix that canal, build that wall. In return they got rations, barley, oil, beer, sometimes cloth or tools. It was the world's first economy of scale. The White Temple was Uruk's crown jewel, built around 3400 BCE on a platform 40 feet high. You could see it from miles away. Travelers knew they were approaching something important, something different. The temple was covered in white gypsum plaster that gleamed in the sun. At night, fires burned on its roof. A beacon, a statement. This is civilization. This is where the future lives. But Uruk wasn't just about temples. The city invented things we still use today. The cylinder seal, for instance. A small stone cylinder carved with pictures and symbols. Roll it across wet clay, and it leaves your personal mark. Your signature. These seals were used on everything. Contracts, storage jars, letters. They were ID cards, credit cards, and signatures all rolled into one. Literally. The city's growth was explosive. By 3200 BCE, maybe 20,000 people lived there. By 2900 BCE, it hit 50,000, possibly 80,000, bigger than most modern towns. And nobody had a blueprint for this. They were making it up as they went. Where do you put the garbage from 50,000 people? How do you get fresh water to everyone? What do you do about crime? These weren't theoretical questions. They needed answers. Fast. So Uruk innovated. They built the first sewers, not pretty but functional. Clay pipes under the streets carrying waste away. They divided the city into districts. Potters here, metalworkers there, weavers over there. It made sense. Keep the noisy, smelly industries away from the temples. Put similar workers together so they could share tools and knowledge. The streets tell their own story. The oldest ones are chaos, narrow, winding, going nowhere in particular. But by 3000 BCE, you see planning. Wider main streets, smaller side alleys, a logic to the layout. The city was learning how to be a city. Trade exploded from Uruk. The city sat at a perfect spot. Rivers for transport, roads to everywhere else. Merchants came from hundreds of miles away. They brought things Mesopotamia didn't have. Copper from Oman, wood from Lebanon, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. Beautiful blue stone that was worth more than gold. In exchange, Uruk sent out textiles, pottery, grain, and something new. Manufactured goods, mass-produced items made by specialists. This is where careers were born. In a village, everyone does everything. You farm, you build, you make your own tools. But in Uruk, you could be just a potter. Spend all day, every day making pots. Get really good at it. Develop new techniques. Train apprentices. Create a reputation. The city had room for specialists. Jewelers, leather workers, scribes, brewers, even beauticians. Yes, there were people whose job was making other people look good. The social structure was complex. At the top, priests and priestesses. Below them, administrators and scribes. Then merchants and master craftsmen. Then regular workers. At the bottom, slaves. Usually war prisoners or people who couldn't pay debts. It wasn't equal, but it worked. Everyone knew their place. Everyone had a role. King Enmerkar shows up in the legends around this time. Maybe 3000 BC. The stories say he was the king who needed writing invented because his messages were too long for messengers to memorize. True? Who knows? But it tells us something important. The city was getting so complex that human memory wasn't enough anymore. They needed a way to store information outside their heads. The archaeological layers at Uruk are like reading a book. You can see periods of prosperity, lots of construction, beautiful pottery, then disaster, burned buildings, broken walls, then rebuilding, always rebuilding. The city was sacked multiple times, but it always came back. People had invested too much to abandon it. By 2700 BCE, Uruk's golden age was ending. Other cities had learned the urban game. Ur, Lagesh, Nippur. They were competing for trade routes, for resources, for power. Uruk was no longer unique, no longer the only city in the world, but it had done something irreversible. It had proven cities could work, that thousands of strangers could live together, could create something bigger than any village, could build monuments that lasted millennia. The idea of the city spread from Uruk like ripples on water. Within centuries, cities appeared everywhere. Egypt, India, China, all following Uruk's basic blueprint. Temples or palaces at the center, markets nearby, residential districts spreading out, walls for protection. It's a pattern you can still see in old cities today. Uruk itself would continue for thousands of years, growing and shrinking with the fortunes of empire. But its greatest achievement happened in those early centuries. when it figured out the basic rules of urban life, how to organize strangers, how to distribute resources, how to create common purpose among people who didn't share blood or history, just proximity, just the accident of living in the same place at the same time, and somehow making that work. Nobody woke up one morning and decided to invent writing. It happened slowly, accidentally really. Around 3200 BCE, the temples in Uruk had a problem. They were receiving thousands of offerings, sheep, grain, jars of oil, and they were losing track. Priests would argue about who brought what. Farmers claimed they'd already paid their taxes. It was a mess. So someone, we'll never know who, had an idea. What if we make marks in clay? Simple pictures. A circle with lines for the sun, meaning day. Wavy lines for water. A triangle for woman because it looked like the pubic area. Crude, basic, but it worked. You could look at a tablet and know. 3 sheep delivered, 10 jars of oil received, no more arguments. These first tablets are painful to read, not because the language is foreign, but because they're just lists, boring lists. Sheep, sheep, sheep. Grain, sheep. Oil, sheep. Like reading someone's grocery receipts from 5,000 years ago. But hidden in those boring lists was a revolution. For the first time, human memory existed outside a human brain. The early system was pure pictures. Want to write 5 sheep, draw 5 sheep. Want to write king, draw a crown. But this was slow and limited. How do you draw justice? How do you draw yesterday? How do you draw someone's name? The pictures weren't enough. The breakthrough came when some clever scribe realized something. Words that sound the same can share symbols. In Sumerian, the word for arrow was tai, but ti also meant life. So the symbol for arrow could mean both, depending on context. This was huge. Suddenly you could write abstract ideas, emotions, concepts, things you couldn't draw. Within a few centuries, the pictures got simpler, more abstract. Instead of drawing a whole bird, just a few wedge marks that suggested a bird. These wedge shapes gave the writing its name, cuneiform, from the Latin word for wedge. By 2800 BCE, scribes were using about 600 different symbols. Still a lot, but manageable. You could learn them, master them, make a career from them. The tools were simple. A reed stylus cut at an angle, soft clay tablets about the size of your hand. You'd press the stylus into the clay at different angles. Horizontal marks, vertical marks, diagonal marks. Combine them different ways to make different symbols. When you were done, leave the tablet in the sun to dry, or bake it in a kiln if you wanted it to last forever. And some have. We can read complaints and love letters written 5,000 years ago. Learning to write was brutal. School started at sunrise. Boys, mostly rich boys, would sit in rows copying the same symbols over and over. The teacher, called an ummiyah, would walk around with a stick. Make a mistake? Whack. Fall asleep? Whack. Talk to your neighbor? Whack. One student tablet reads, "My teacher caned me for being late. He caned me for talking. He caned me for standing up. He caned me for my bad handwriting." The exercises they copied are hilarious and weirdly familiar. The dog walked into the tavern and said, "I can't see anything. Open the door so I can see." That's an actual student exercise, a talking dog joke. From 4,000 years ago. Some things never change. But most students weren't there to write literature. They were training for jobs, good jobs. A scribe could work for temples, palaces, merchants. They wrote contracts, recorded sales, copied laws, sent letters. In a world where maybe 1% of people could read, scribes were essential. They were the internet, the email, the Google, all rolled into one person. The profession became hereditary. Scribal families passed the knowledge down, father to son, uncle to nephew, sometimes father to daughter, though female scribes were rare. These families guarded their knowledge jealously. Why teach outsiders when you can keep the power in the family? By 2600 BCE, writing had evolved beyond accounting. People started writing stories, hymns, proverbs, letters, Real letters, not just business stuff. To my mother from your son who loves you. I am well. The food here is terrible. Please send beer and clean clothes. People started signing their work. Written by the hand of Kushim, scribe of the Great Temple. Pride in authorship. The birth of literature. The Epic of Gilgamesh was probably told orally for centuries before someone wrote it down around 2100 BCE. But once it was written, it became immortal. The story could travel without a storyteller, could survive the death of everyone who knew it, could wait silently in the ruins for archaeologists to find it thousands of years later. Writing changed how people thought. Before writing, knowledge was personal. You knew what you remembered, what your parents told you, what you experienced. But with writing, you could know things from before you were born, from places you'd never been, from people you'd never met. The human experience became cumulative. Each generation could build on the last. It also created power imbalances. If you couldn't read, you were dependent on those who could. Scribes could lie about what contracts said. Priests could claim the gods said things they didn't. Kings could rewrite history to make themselves look better. Writing was power, and like all power, it could be abused. The spread of writing was slow at first. For centuries it stayed in Mesopotamia, but traders carried it along their routes. Diplomats used it for treaties. Conquerors imposed it on the conquered. By 2000 BCE, different writing systems had appeared in Egypt, India, China. All independent inventions, but all solving the same problem. How do we store information outside our heads? The Sumerians created writing for the most mundane reason. Bookkeeping, accounting, sheep and grain. But what they actually created was external memory, the ability to speak to the future, to transmit thoughts across time and space. Every book, every email, every text message traces back to those first marks in clay, those bored temple accountants counting sheep. Think about that. Right now you're reading symbols that represent sounds that represent ideas. The technology is different. Paper or screens instead of clay. Alphabets instead of pictographs. But the concept is the same. Making thoughts permanent. It's something so fundamental to our lives that we barely think about it. But someone had to invent it. And they did. In Uruk, 5,000 years ago. Because they had too many sheep to count. The last cuneiform tablet was written around 100 CE. By then, alphabets had replaced the old wedge marks. Easier to learn, faster to write, more flexible. Cuneiform became a dead system. For almost 2,000 years, nobody could read it. The tablets were just mysterious objects covered in strange marks, until scholars in the 1800s cracked the code, and suddenly the Sumerians could speak again. Their complaints about lazy workers, their love poems, their grocery lists, all of it preserved in dried mud. That's the miracle of writing. It makes us immortal. Not our bodies, but our thoughts, our words, our stories. A scribe in ancient Uruk pressed a reed into clay, and 5,000 years later, we know what he was thinking. That's magic. Real magic. The only magic that actually works. The gods of Sumer weren't distant figures living in some far-off heaven. They lived right downtown. Each city had its own god who literally owned the place. Enlil owned Nippur. Inanna owned Uruk. Enki owned Eridu. The city belonged to them the way your house belongs to you. The human rulers? They were just property managers. This wasn't metaphorical. The temples owned most of the land, most of the animals, most of the workshops. When you worked temple land, you were working for the god. When you paid taxes, you were paying rent to the god. The whole economy ran through these divine households. And the priests? They were the god's accountants. Take the Inanna temple in Uruk, home of Inanna, goddess of love and war. Strange combination, but it worked for her. By 3000 BCE, this temple complex was massive. 20 acres of buildings, workshops where hundreds of women wove textiles, breweries making beer, bakeries, metalworking shops, storage rooms filled with grain, oil, wool. It was less temple, more corporation, the biggest corporation in the world. The numbers are staggering. One tablet from Lagash records a temple owning 25,000 acres of farmland. That's about 40 square miles. Another temple employed 1,200 people year-round. During harvest, that number tripled. These weren't just religious institutions. They were the engines of the economy. Here's how it worked. The temple would give you a plot of land to farm, or sheep to tend, or a workshop to operate. In return, you gave the temple most of what you produced. The temple kept some for the priests and temple workers. Some went to feed the poor during hard times. Some got traded for things the city needed. Copper, wood, stone. It was a centralized economy run by priests who claimed they were just following divine orders. The high priest or priestess had a unique job. They were married to the god, literally. Once a year they'd perform a sacred marriage ceremony. The priestess would have sex with the king or high priest, who was playing the role of the god. This wasn't symbolic. They actually had sex, in public. During a religious festival, the idea was that if the gods were having good sex, the land would be fertile. The crops would grow. The animals would multiply. Sacred sex for agricultural success. Beer was sacred. No, really. The goddess Ninkasi was in charge of brewing, and beer was used in every religious ceremony. The temples employed professional brewers, usually women, who made different grades. There was ordinary beer for regular offerings, filtered beer for important ceremonies, and special sweet beer for the highest rituals. Workers got paid in beer rations. 5 litres a day for men, 3 for women, 2 for children. Yes, children drank beer. It was safer than water. The temples invented standardized measurements because the gods demanded precision. A silla of beer, a gur of grain, a minna of silver. These measurements were sacred. Cheat on them, and you weren't just stealing from people. You were stealing from the gods. And the gods, everyone knew, had terrible tempers. Every morning started with feeding the gods. And I mean that literally. Priests would prepare meals, real food, bread, meat, beer, fruit. They'd arrange it on golden plates and carry it to the statue of the god. The statue would eat it, meaning the priest would leave it there for a while, then eat it themselves. The god, they explained, consumed the spiritual essence. The priest just cleaned up the physical leftovers. Convenient system. The statues themselves were treated like living beings. They were washed daily, dressed in new clothes, taken out for processions. When cities were conquered, the victors would kidnap the statues, not just as trophies. People believed the god actually lived in the statue. Lose your statue, lose your god's protection. Cities would pay enormous ransoms to get their gods back. Temple prostitution is controversial among scholars. Did it really exist? The evidence says yes, but not the way movies show it. These weren't random prostitutes. They were women dedicated to Inanna or Ishtar, high-status women, educated, wealthy. They performed sacred sexual acts as part of religious ceremonies. It was about fertility and divine power, not common prostitution, though regular prostitution existed too, usually in taverns run by women, but that wasn't religious. That was just business. The temples were the first banks. They had secure storage, armed guards, scribes who could track accounts. So people started depositing valuables there. Gold, silver, grain. The temples would lend it out. With interest, of course. The standard rate was 20% for silver, 33% for grain. The gods apparently were serious about returns on investment. One tablet records a merchant borrowing silver from the temple of Shamash to fund a trading expedition. He promised to repay double if the venture succeeded. The gods were venture capitalists. But here's where it gets interesting. Around 2350 BCE, the balance of power started shifting. Kings were getting stronger. They'd won wars, built armies, accumulated their own wealth. They started asking dangerous questions. Why should the temples own everything? Why should priests control the economy? Why can't the king talk directly to the gods? Some kings started claiming divine parentage. My mother was a goddess, they'd say. Or, the god appeared to me in a dream. They built their own temples, appointed their own priests, started taking land from the old temples and giving it to their supporters. The priests fought back with prophecies and curses, but they didn't have armies. The kings did. This tension between temple and palace would define Mesopotamian politics for the next 1,000 years. Sometimes the priest would win, using popular uprising against unpopular kings. Sometimes the kings would win, reducing temples to purely religious functions. But the gods never went away. Even the most powerful kings knew better than to ignore them completely. Because here's the thing about Sumerian religion. It wasn't separate from daily life. It was daily life. The gods controlled the weather, the floods, disease, fertility, war, everything that mattered. You couldn't opt out. Atheism wasn't an option. The best you could do was try to keep the gods happy, feed them, praise them, build them nice houses, and hope they didn't notice you. The temple complexes shaped the cities around them. Markets formed near temple gates because that's where people gathered. Craftsmen set up workshops nearby to get temple contracts. Scribal schools opened next door because temples needed educated workers. The whole urban ecosystem grew around these sacred centers. By 2000 BCE, the old temple-centered economy was breaking down. Private merchants were getting rich. Secular power was growing. The gods were still important, but they weren't the only game in town anymore. The age of divine monopoly was ending. The age of human ambition was beginning. But those temple complexes, some of them would stand for another 1,000 years. Empty. Ruined. But still standing. Monuments to a time when gods ran the economy and priests were CEOs. Wake up in ancient Sumer. It's still dark. No windows in your mud brick house, just a small oil lamp flickering in the corner. You share this 2-room house with your wife, 3 kids, and your elderly mother. The rooms are small, maybe 10 by 12 feet each, one for sleeping, one for everything else, cooking, eating, working, living. You step into the courtyard. Every house has one, open to the sky. This is where life happens. Your wife is already up grinding barley for breakfast. The sound of stone on stone. Every morning. Same sound that's been waking Sumerians for 1,000 years. The kids are still sleeping on reed mats on the floor. Let them sleep. They'll be working soon enough. Breakfast is porridge, always porridge. Barley boiled in water. Maybe some dates if you have them. Salt if you're lucky. Your wife adds sesame oil today. Must be a special occasion. Oh right, it's market day. She'll need energy for haggling. You eat from a clay bowl you made yourself. Nothing fancy, just functional, like everything in your life. Your oldest son, he's 8, wakes up excited. Today he starts scribal school. You've saved for years to afford it. 3 shekels of silver per month. That's 2 months of your wages. But if he learns to write, he'll never go hungry, never work in the fields under the burning sun, never have hands like yours, cracked, calloused, old before their time. You're a potter, like your father, like his father. You leave the house as the sun rises and walk to your workshop. It's in the potter's quarter, 40 workshops clustered together, the sound of wheels spinning, clay slapping, masters yelling at apprentices, the smell of wet earth and kiln smoke. This is your world. Has been since you were 7 years old. Your wife heads to the market with your daughter. She's 12, old enough to learn how to run a household, how to judge good barley from bad, how to argue with merchants, how to stretch a shekel of silver until it screams. They carry empty baskets that will come back full, hopefully. The harvest was bad this year, prices are high, everyone's worried. The market is chaos, beautiful chaos. Hundreds of people shouting, bargaining, arguing, laughing. You can buy anything here. Wheat from the north, fish from the south, wool from the temple flocks, copper tools from travelling merchants, even exotic stuff, incense from Arabia, blue stones from Afghanistan, if you have money, which most people don't. Your wife stops at the baker. Bread is expensive. 1 shekel buys 20 loaves. That's got to last a week. She haggles. The baker wants more. She threatens to go to his competitor. He drops the price by 2 loaves. She acts insulted. He throws in an extra half loaf. They both know this dance. Been doing it for years. Neither admits they enjoy it. Next, the beer woman. Beer is essential, safer than water, nutritious too. The beer woman, her name is Kubaba, runs the tavern. She's rich, one of the few women who owns property, makes her own beer, sets her own prices, takes no grief from anyone. Your wife respects her, fears her a little too. Kubaba knows everyone's business. Cross her and the whole city knows your secrets. Back home for lunch, bread and beer, some onions, a small piece of dried fish. You eat quickly, got to get back to the workshop. You're making storage jars for the temple, big ones. 3 feet tall, they need hundreds. It's good steady work. Boring, but steady. Your mother watches the younger kids. She's teaching your daughter to weave. Every woman needs to know. Even rich women weave. It's what women do. Hours at the loom, making cloth for clothes, for trade, for dowries. Your mother's fingers are twisted from 50 years of weaving, but they still move fast, still know the patterns, still remember. Your neighbour is having legal troubles. Someone claims he owes them silver. He doesn't. But the other guy has a tablet, a contract, with his seal on it. Problem is, your neighbour can't read. He doesn't know what he sealed. The judges will meet at the city gate tomorrow. Public trial. Everyone will watch. Everyone will have opinions. Justice as entertainment. The afternoon is hot. Brutal hot. 120 degrees in the shade, if there was shade. Work slows down. Even the overseers know better than to push too hard in this heat. You sit in your workshop doorway, drink warm beer, talk with the other potters, complain about taxes. Temple takes 30%, palace takes 20%. What's left barely feeds your family. Your son comes home from school crying. The teacher hit him. A lot. His hands are swollen from the reed switch. His crime. His handwriting was sloppy. You want to comfort him, but you don't. This is how boys become men. Through pain. Through discipline. Through learning that the world doesn't care about your tears. Dinner is the big meal. Your wife has worked magic. Barley stew with actual meat. Goat meat. Where did she get goat meat? You don't ask. Women have their ways. There's flatbread, cucumbers, even a small pot of honey for dessert. The kids' eyes go wide. Honey is for festivals, for celebrations. Your wife smiles, says nothing. But you know, she sold something. Probably that bronze pin her mother left her. Times are hard. After dinner, you sit on the roof. It's cooler up there. The whole neighbourhood is on their roofs, talking, gossiping. Someone has a drum, someone else a flute. Music drifts across the flat rooftops. Your wife tells stories to the kids. Old stories. About Gilgamesh. About the flood. About when gods walked with humans. The same stories her mother told her. You think about your life. It's not easy. Never enough money. Always worried about the harvest. About taxes. About war. The city of has been making threats. There are rumours of armies gathering. Young men being conscripted. You're too old to fight. But your son, in a few years, he won't be. But there's good too. Your family's healthy. Mostly. Your eldest daughter just got married. Good match. A metalworker's son. They'll do well. Your potter's mark is respected. People ask for you by name. That's something. That's pride. You're not rich. Not important. But you're part of something. This city. This civilization. This great experiment in living together. The stars come out. More stars than you can count. The priests say they form patterns. Tell the future. You don't understand it. But you like looking at them. They're beautiful. Eternal. They were here before Uruk. They'll be here after. That's comforting somehow. You go to bed on the roof. Too hot inside. The whole family sleeps up here in summer, close together on reed mats. You can hear your neighbours snoring, babies crying, someone having sex. Privacy doesn't exist in Sumer. Everyone knows everyone's business. That's annoying, but also safe. No one's alone. Everyone's watching. Everyone's watched. Tomorrow will be the same, and different. The wheel of day is turning. Planting season, harvest season, flood season, festival season, birth, death, marriage, work, always work. This is life in the world's first cities. Hard, simple, complex, human, completely human. Your grandson might live differently, might see things you can't imagine. But right now, in this moment, on this roof, under these eternal stars, life is what it's always been. Family, work, community, survival, the basic human recipe, started here, in these mud brick houses, these narrow streets, these first cities where strangers learned to be neighbours. The first kings weren't kings at all. They were called big men, literally. Lugal in Sumerian, the guy who was tallest, strongest, best fighter. When raiders came, everyone looked to him. When the crisis passed, he went back to farming. But the crises kept coming, and the big man kept staying in charge. By 2900 BCE, being king was a full-time job. The position had evolved from temporary war chief to permanent ruler. Kings had palaces, armies, treasuries, power, real power, not granted by the people, taken, held, defended. The age of democracy, such as it was over. The age of monarchy had begun. The Sumerian king list is a strange document. It claims kings before the Great Flood lived for thousands of years. Alolim of Eridu ruled for 28,800 years. Sure he did, but buried in the mythology are real names, real kings, Enmebaragesi of Kish. We have his inscriptions. He lived around 2700 BCE. He fought wars, built temples, left his mark, literally, on stone. The first real war we know about was between Lagash and Yuma, around 2500 BCE. They fought over a piece of land called Guadana. Good farmland, irrigation access. Worth dying for. The king of Lagash, Eannatum, won. He celebrated by creating the Stele of the Vultures, a stone monument showing enemy corpses being eaten by birds. War propaganda carved in stone. Some things never change. Here's how wars worked. First, diplomacy. Ambassadors would travel between cities. Threats would be made. Offers rejected. Gods would be invoked. Our God is stronger than your God. Then, if talking failed, the armies would meet. But not randomly. Wars had rules, times, places. Like a deadly sport with agreed-upon boundaries. The armies were small at first. Maybe a few hundred men. Citizens mostly. Farmers with spears. But by 2500 BCE, professional soldiers appeared. Men who did nothing but train and fight. They had better weapons. Bronze spears. Copper helmets. Leather armor reinforced with metal discs. They fought in formation. Shield to shield. Spear points forward. The phalanx. Invented here, in Sumer, 3,000 years before the Greeks made it famous. Kings justified their wars through divine mandate. The god told me to attack. I'm restoring divine order. The enemy insulted our deity. Religion and politics mixed into a toxic cocktail that justified any violence. One inscription reads, "The god Enlil gave me strength. I smashed their cities. I filled their canals with their bodies. Holy war. The gift that keeps on giving." The king's power came from redistribution. He'd collect taxes, in grain mostly, sometimes silver or labour. Then he'd throw public feasts, fund temple construction, provide seed during bad harvests. The king was the ultimate patron. Everyone owed him, everyone depended on him. Cross him, and you didn't just lose political protection, you lost economic survival. But kings weren't absolute. They had to deal with assemblies, groups of elders and important citizens who could oppose royal decisions. Not openly, that was dangerous, but through foot-dragging, bureaucratic resistance, lost tax records, delayed conscription lists. Passive resistance is as old as power itself. The tension between palace and temple was constant. Kings needed priests for legitimacy. Priests needed kings for protection, but both wanted supreme power. Sometimes they worked together. Sometimes they plotted against each other. The smart kings married high priestesses, combined religious and political power through marriage. The really smart ones claimed divine parentage, cut out the priestly middleman. war technology advanced rapidly. Chariots appeared around 2600 BCE, not the fast war chariots of later periods. These were heavy, slow, pulled by donkeys or oxen. But they were mobile platforms for archers, psychological weapons. Imagine being a farmer with a spear and this thing comes rolling toward you. Terrifying. Cities responded with walls, massive walls. Uruk's wall was 6 miles long, 30 feet high, 900 towers. Building it required organizing thousands of workers, feeding them, housing them, managing them. The logistics of wall building created administrative systems that outlasted the walls themselves. Siege warfare developed in response, battering rams, scaling ladders, undermining tunnels, the eternal race between offense and defense. One city, Girsu, built walls so thick that houses were constructed inside them, living in the walls, protected by tons of mud brick. Urban planning meets military engineering. The code of war was brutal but had limits. Cities could surrender, pay tribute, become vassals. Total destruction was rare, too expensive, too wasteful. You wanted the city's production, not its ashes, but examples had to be made. One city resist too hard, destroy it completely, kill the men, enslave the women and children, let everyone know the cost of resistance. Professional soldiers needed payment. Land grants were common. Serve the king, get a farm. But this created a military aristocracy. Soldiers who became landowners who had military training, a new class between the palace and the common people, loyal to the king, but also to their own interests. By 2400 BCE, war had become endemic. Every city fought every other city. Alliances formed and broke. Yesterday's enemy was today's ally and tomorrow's betrayer. The constant warfare drained resources, killed young men, destroyed infrastructure, weakened everyone equally, made them all vulnerable to outside conquest, which is exactly what happened. Around 2334 BCE, Sargon of Akkad looked at these exhausted, warring cities and saw opportunity. His army, speaking a different language, using different tactics, swept through Sumer like a flood. City after city fell. The age of independent city-states was ending. The age of empire was beginning. But the idea of kingship that Sumer created would outlast Sumer itself. Divine mandate, royal bloodlines, palace bureaucracy, court ceremony, military aristocracy, all of it started here, in these first cities, with these first kings, these big men who discovered that in times of crisis people will trade freedom for security, every time. The last independent Sumerian king was Eridu-Pizir of Isin, around 2004 BCE. After him, Sumerians would be ruled by Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, Persians. Never again would they control their own fate. But the institution they created, monarchy, would dominate human civilization for the next 4,000 years. Not bad for a bunch of farmers who just needed someone tall to lead them in battle. Gilgamesh was probably real. A king of Uruk around 2700 BCE. His name shows up on the Sumerian king list. Gilgamesh, whose father was a phantom, ruled for 126 years. Obviously the years are exaggerated. But the man existed. He built walls. Won wars, left enough of an impression that people couldn't stop talking about him. And the talk turned into stories. The stories turned into legends. The legends became the first epic humanity ever wrote down. The version we know best comes from 12 tablets found in the library of Ashurbanipal, an Assyrian king who lived 2,000 years after Gilgamesh. Think about that. The story was already ancient when it was copied for the last time. It had been told and retold, changed and embellished, translated and adapted for 2 millennia. Like a game of telephone that lasted 2,000 years. Here's the story. Gilgamesh is king of Uruk. 2/3 god, 1/3 human. Strong as an ox, beautiful as a god, and a complete tyrant. He claims first-night rights with every bride. Forces men to build his walls until they drop dead. Beats up anyone who looks at him wrong. The people cry out to the gods, "Help us! Our king is a monster!" The gods have a solution. They create Enkidu, a wild man who lives with animals, eats grass, drinks from streams, has never seen a city. He's as strong as Gilgamesh but pure, innocent. The opposite of the corrupted king. The gods figure they'll fight, and one will kill the other. Problem solved either way. A temple prostitute named Shamhat is sent to civilize Enkidu. She has sex with him for 6 days and 7 nights. That's not a typo. 6 days, 7 nights. After that marathon, Enkidu can't return to the wild. The animals run from him. He's no longer one of them. He's become human. Shamhat teaches him to eat bread, drink beer, wear clothes, act like a person. She brings him to Uruk. Enkidu hears about Gilgamesh's tyranny and gets angry. He blocks the king's way to another wedding night. They fight in the street, wrestling, punching, throwing each other through walls. The whole city watches. They're perfectly matched. Neither can win. Finally exhausted, they stop, look at each other, and start laughing. They become best friends, closer than brothers, 2 halves of one soul. Together, they go on adventures. First, they travel to the cedar forest to fight Humbaba, a monster guardian. Why? Because it's there. Because they're young and strong and stupid. They kill Humbaba, even though he begs for mercy. The god Enlil is furious. That monster was there for a reason. It was protecting the cedars from humans. Now there's nothing to stop deforestation. Back in Uruk, the goddess Ishtar sees Gilgamesh and wants him. "Marry me," she says. "Be my lover." Gilgamesh refuses, rudely. He lists all her previous lovers and what happened to them. Turned into wolves, turned into birds, killed, castrated. "Thanks, but no thanks," he says. Ishtar is humiliated, enraged. She sends the bull of heaven to destroy Uruk. The bull is devastating. Its breath creates pits that swallow hundreds of men. Its charge shakes the city walls. But Gilgamesh and Enkidu fight together. They kill it. Enkidu even throws the bull's thigh at Ishtar. "If I could reach you, I'd do the same to you." Bad move. You don't insult goddesses, not if you want to live. The gods hold a council. Someone has to die for these crimes, killing Humbaba, killing the sacred bull, insulting Ishtar. They choose Enkidu. He gets sick. 12 days of agony. Gilgamesh watches his friend waste away, tries everything, prayers, offerings, medicine. Nothing works. Enkidu dies cursing the gods, cursing civilization, wishing he'd stayed wild. Gilgamesh goes insane with grief. He won't let them bury Enkidu for 7 days until worms start falling from the corpse. Then he runs, leaves Uruk, becomes wild himself, wears animal skins, eats raw meat, wanders the wilderness crying, "Will I die too? Will I be like Enkidu? I'm afraid. I'm so afraid." He decides to find immortality. There's one human who achieved it, Utnapishtim, the survivor of the Great Flood. The gods made him immortal as a reward. He lives at the end of the world, past the mountains of Mashu, beyond the waters of death. Gilgamesh sets off to find him. The journey is impossible. He meets scorpion people who guard the mountain pass, a woman who runs a tavern at the world's edge. She tells him to go home. Enjoy life, eat, drink, dance, hold your children, love your wife. That's what humans are for. He ignores her. He crosses the waters of death on a ferry guided by Urshanabi, the only one who knows the way. Finally he reaches Utnapishtim. "Tell me," Gilgamesh begs. "How do I become immortal?" Utnapishtim laughs. "You can't even stay awake for 7 days. How can you live forever?" He tells the story of the flood, how the gods decided to destroy humanity, how the god Ea warned him, how he built a boat, saved his family, saved the animals, how the gods regretted their decision and made him immortal so someone would remember. But that was a one-time thing, Utnapishtim says. The gods won't do it again. Gilgamesh is crushed, but Utnapishtim's wife feels sorry for him. She convinces her husband to tell Gilgamesh about a plant, deep underwater, guarded by serpents. If you eat it, you become young again, not immortal, but renewed. Gilgamesh dives deep, fights the serpents, gets the plant. He's triumphant. He'll take it back to Uruk, share it with his people, make everyone young. But on the journey home, he stops to bathe in a pool. A snake smells the plant, steals it, eats it. That's why snakes shed their skin. They stole humanity's chance at renewal. Gilgamesh weeps. Everything has been for nothing. His friend is dead. The plant is gone. He's going to die. There's no escape. He returns to Uruk empty-handed, but as he approaches the city he sees the walls. The walls he built. Massive, beautiful, eternal. They'll outlast him. They'll outlast everyone. That's his immortality. What he built. What he created. The mark he left on the world. The epic ends where it began, with Gilgamesh showing someone the walls of Uruk. Look, he says, see how they're made. Study the foundation. Examine the brickwork. Isn't it magnificent? This will last forever. And in a way, he was right. The walls are gone, but we're still talking about them. About him, about his story. That's the genius of the epic. It's about the search for immortality, written in a medium that grants immortality. The story itself is what Gilgamesh was looking for. As long as people tell it, he lives. Enkidu lives. Their friendship, their adventures, their failures and fears, all of it lives. The Sumerians who first told this story achieved what their hero couldn't. They became immortal through words. Different versions exist: Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, Hittite. Each culture added its own concerns, its own wisdom, but the core remains. Two friends, a journey, a failure that's actually a success. The human condition in 12 tablets of clay: love, death, fear, hope, the desire to matter, to last, to mean something. Modern readers find it surprisingly relatable. Gilgamesh's grief feels real, raw. His fear of death is our fear. His love for Enkidu transcends time and culture. Some scholars read it as a love story, maybe romantic, maybe not. Doesn't matter, it's love. Deep, transformative, tragic love. The kind that makes you crazy when you lose it. The story influenced everything that came after. The biblical flood story, the Odyssey, the Iliad, every hero's journey, everybody's story, every meditation on mortality. It all goes back to Gilgamesh, a king who may have lived, a story that definitely lives, the first epic, still one of the best. Sargon of Akkad started as nobody, a gardener, the stories say, maybe the son of a priestess who couldn't keep him, set adrift in a basket on the river, raised by a water draw. Sound familiar? Moses, Romulus. Every culture has this story, the abandoned baby who becomes a great leader. But with Sargon, it might be true. He first appears in history as cupbearer to the king of Kish. That's a high position, trusted, close to power. The king drinks what you pour. One poison cup and you're king. But Sargon was patient. He waited, watched, learned. When the king of Kish died, Sargon didn't poison him. Probably. But he did seize power. Around 2334 BCE, he declared himself king. Not of Kish, of Akkad. A new city he built himself. The Akkadians were Semites. Different language from the Sumerians. Different gods. Different culture. They'd been living alongside Sumerians for centuries. Learning from them. Trading with them. Serving in their armies. But always as outsiders. Second class. Sargon changed that. He united the Akkadian-speaking peoples. Gave them pride. Purpose. And most importantly, gave them victory. His army was different, more mobile, better organized. While Sumerian armies still fought city by city, each with its own style, Sargon created standardization. Same weapons, same training, same tactics. His soldiers were professionals, full-time, well-paid, loyal to him, not to any city. They could march faster, fight longer, strike where unexpected. The conquest was methodical. First he took the northern cities, Kish, Akkad, Sippar. Then he turned south. The Sumerian cities were exhausted from centuries of fighting each other. They couldn't unite against this external threat. Old rivalries ran too deep. Some cities even welcomed Sargon, hoping he'd destroy their enemies. Lugalsigisi of Umma had just conquered most of Sumer. He thought he was the big power, the unifier. He met Sargon's army confident of victory. The battle was a massacre. Sargon didn't just defeat him, he humiliated him, put him in a neck stock, paraded him to Nippur, made him crawl to the temple of Enlil. The message was clear. The old order was dead. Sargon's inscriptions boast, "I conquered the land from the sunrise to the sunset, from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea, the first multi-ethnic empire, Sumerians, Akkadians, Amorites, Hurrians, all under one rule, different languages, different gods, different cultures, but one king, one law, one army keeping the peace." But Sargon was smart. He didn't destroy Sumerian culture, he absorbed it, adopted it. His scribes wrote in both Akkadian and Sumerian. His daughter Enheduanna, history's first-named author, was appointed high priestess of Ur. She wrote hymns in Sumerian, beautiful hymns that merged Akkadian and Sumerian religious traditions, politics through poetry. The empire's administration was revolutionary. Instead of ruling through local kings, Sargon appointed governors. Akkadians, usually, loyal to him, they collected taxes, enforced laws, raised troops, reported directly to Akkad. It was centralized government on a scale never seen before. The blueprint for every empire that followed. Trade flourished under Akkadian rule. One government meant no borders, no tariffs between cities, standardized weights and measures everywhere. The same laws in Ur and Uruk, Lagash and Larsa. Merchants could travel safely, roads were patrolled, pirates suppressed, business boomed. Akkad became the richest city in the world. But empires are expensive. Standing armies need payment, governors need salaries, roads need maintenance. Sargon taxed heavily, very heavily. The Sumerians grumbled. They'd traded independence for prosperity and security. But was it worth it? Many thought not. Rebellion sparked constantly. Sargon spent his entire reign putting them down. His successors had it worse. Rimush, Sargon's son, faced revolts immediately. He crushed them brutally. One inscription boasts of killing 54,000 rebels. His brother Manishtushu was assassinated, probably by his own courtiers. The empire was too big, too diverse, too expensive. Holding it together required constant force. Then came Naram-Sin, Sargon's grandson. He went further than anyone before. He declared himself a god, not godlike, not chosen by gods, an actual god. He put the divine determinative before his name in inscriptions, built temples to himself, demanded worship. This was too much, even for ancient Mesopotamians who were used to powerful kings. The Curse of Agadi, written after the empire's fall, blames Naram-Sin for everything. He destroyed the temple of Enlil in Nippur. The gods cursed Akkad, brought drought, famine, invasion. The Gutians, barbarians from the Zagros Mountains, descended like locusts. The empire collapsed around 2154 BCE. Akkad itself was destroyed so thoroughly that archaeologists still haven't found it. But the Akkadian impact was permanent. Their language became the diplomatic tongue of the ancient Near East, used for international correspondence for the next 2,000 years. Akkadian cuneiform spread everywhere. Their administrative systems were copied by every subsequent empire. The idea that diverse peoples could be united under one rule, that started with Sargon. The Sumerians got their independence back, briefly. The Neo-Sumerian period followed, but they were changed. The pure Sumerian culture was gone, mixed with Akkadian elements, hybrid, evolved. The future belonged to this mixture. Babylonian civilization, which followed, was neither purely Sumerian nor Akkadian. It was both, a synthesis. Climate data adds another layer. The Akkadian collapse coincided with a massive drought, the 4.2 kilo-year event. Global cooling, reduced rainfall, crop failures. Maybe Naram-Sin's hubris didn't cause the collapse. Maybe climate did, or maybe both. Environmental crisis often triggers political collapse. They feed each other. The Akkadian period lasted only 180 years. Not long for an empire, but it changed everything. Before Sargon, the political unit was the city-state. After him, it was the territorial empire. Before him, cultural identity was local. After him, it could transcend geography. He showed that conquest could create unity, that diversity could be strength, that one man's ambition could reshape the world. The last Akkadian king was Shuturul, a nobody, controlled nothing but the capital, maybe not even that. The Gutians were the real power, but he kept the title, kept the fiction alive, until even that became impossible. The empire ended not with a bang, but a whimper. A forgotten king in a besieged city writing desperate letters to governors who no longer obeyed. After the Gutians destroyed everything, southern Mesopotamia was chaos. For 60 years, these mountain barbarians raided cities, destroyed canals, burned fields. They didn't want to rule, just plunder, take what they could carry, burn the rest. The Sumerian king list calls this the period when kingship was carried off to foreign lands. Dark times, the worst times. But in the city of Uruk, a governor named Utuhengel had enough. Around 2120 BCE, he raised an army. Not a big one. The cities were too weak for that. But motivated, fighting for survival, for their homes, for the chance to plant crops without seeing them burned. He met the Gutian king Tirigan near the Tigris River. The battle was brief, decisive. The Gutians fled back to their mountains, never to return. Utuhengel could have made himself king of everything, but he died, drowned actually, inspecting a dam. Ironic death for a Mesopotamian ruler. Water gave life, water took it. His general, Ur-Nammu, governor of Ur, seized power, founded what historians call the third dynasty of Ur, the Ur III period, the Neo-Sumerian Renaissance, Sumer's last moment of glory. Ur-Nammu was a builder. The great ziggurat of Ur, whose ruins still stand in Iraq, was his project. 70 feet high, 3 levels, faced with baked brick, waterproofed with bitumen. At the top, a temple to the moon god Nana. You could see it from 20 miles away, a mountain built by human hands, a statement. Sumer is back, stronger than ever. But his greatest creation wasn't brick. It was law, the Code of Ur-Nammu, the world's first law code, 300 years before Hammurabi. It's different from what you'd expect. Not eye for an eye, that came later. Ur-Nammu preferred fines. You blind someone, pay 10 shekels. Break someone's bone, pay 1 mina of silver. Murder was still death penalty. But most crimes were economic. Pay your way out of trouble. The code reveals something beautiful and strange. It protected the weak, explicitly. Widows, orphans, the poor. I did not deliver the orphan to the wealthy. I did not deliver the widow to the mighty. I did not deliver the man with 1 shekel to the man with 1 mina. Social justice, 4,000 years ago, written in stone. The administrative system was incredible. We have over 100,000 tablets from just this century. Think about that. 100,000 documents. Recording everything. Sheep delivered to temples. Workers assigned to canal duty. Rations distributed to widows. Letters between officials. Complaints about lazy workers. Requests for more beer. The most documented century in ancient history. They invented bureaucracy as art form. The Baler system rotated tax obligations. Each province paid taxes for 1 month per year, but paid big. Enough to fund the government for that month. The other 11 months, you kept everything. Genius system spread the burden, prevented resentment. Mostly, Ur-Nammu's son Shulgi took it further. Ruled for 48 years. Called himself king of the 4 quarters of the world. Modest guy. He standardized everything. Weights, measures, calendar, even hymns. He created the first national curriculum. Every Scrabble school taught the same texts, same exercises. A kid in Ur learned exactly what a kid in Uruk learned. Shulgi was history's first propagandist. He commissioned hymns about himself, dozens of them. I am a mighty man, running like a lion. I am Shulgi, given strength by Enlil. I can run from Nippur to in one day. That's 200 miles. Sure you can, Shulgi. But people believed it, or pretended to. The hymns were copied for centuries, PR that outlasted the product. He created the first standing army. 20,000 men, professional soldiers, not conscripts. They got land grants, regular pay, pensions for widows, career military. They were called agas, crown followers, loyal to the king, not their cities, not their tribes, the king, period. They enforced his will from the Persian Gulf to the Zagros Mountains. The economy boomed. Became the workshop of the world. Textile production employed thousands. One archive records 6,000 women working in a single textile factory in Guaba. They produced everything: rough cloth for workers, fine garments for export, military uniforms, temple vestments. The quality was so high that textiles were luxury items from Egypt to India. Trade reached distances never seen before. Merchants travelled to Dilmun, modern Bahrain, gateway to everywhere. From there to Magan, Munt, source of copper, to Meluha, probably India, source of carnelian, exotic wood, strange animals. Monkeys appear in elephants mentioned in texts. The world was getting smaller, connected by trade routes that started in harbours. The city itself was magnificent. Population maybe 65,000, massive walls, 3 harbours, 2 major canals, districts for different crafts. The temple complex employed 4,000 people just in maintenance. The royal palace was a city within the city. Throne rooms, treasuries, workshops, barracks, archives, kitchens that could feed thousands. The king lived like a god, because increasingly he claimed to be one. That was the problem. Divine kingship. Shulgi started it. Declared himself divine while still alive, built temples to himself, demanded offerings. His successors went further: Amartsin, Shusin, Ibisin, each more divine, more distant, more expensive. The cost of maintaining god-kings was crushing the economy. Then came the Amorites, Semitic nomads from the Syrian desert, not invading, just migrating, slowly, steadily, looking for grazing land, looking for work. The Earthry kings built a wall, an actual wall, 150 miles long, from the Tigris to the Euphrates, the wall that keeps Amorites away. Didn't work. You can't wall out demographic change. They came anyway, as workers, merchants, mercenaries. Soon they were everywhere. The end came from multiple directions. Elam invaded from the east, taking advantage of weakness. The Amorites pressed from the west. Not organized invasion, just pressure. Constant pressure. Cities started declaring independence. Isin, Larsa, Babylon. The empire fragmented. The last king, Ibisin, held out in Ur for years. Surrounded, starving, still claiming to rule the world. The lamentation over the destruction of Ur describes the end. The storm that annihilates the land. The storm that destroyed the city. Bodies dissolve like butter in the sun. The blood of the land fills holes like bronze. Its dead pile up in heaps. Poetry of catastrophe. Beautiful and terrible. The city fell around 2004 BCE. Ibisin was carried to Elam in chains. The third dynasty of Ur was finished. But what a century it had been. The most organized, most documented, most prosperous period in Sumerian history. They created systems that lasted millennia. Legal codes, administrative structures, educational curricula, trade networks, all copied by successor states. Babylon inherited Ur's bureaucracy. Assyria copied its military organization. Everyone learned from its collapse. The hymns they wrote, the laws they codified, the contracts they signed, the letters they sent, all preserved in clay, waiting underground for archaeologists to find them, to read them, to discover that 4,000 years ago people complained about their teenagers, worried about taxes, argued with neighbors, loved their families, built beautiful things, dreamed big dreams, then lost everything. That's the tragedy and triumph of Ur the Three. They built so high, documented everything, left us more records than any other ancient civilization. We know them better than they knew themselves, can read their grocery lists, their love letters, their desperate prayers as the end approached. They achieved immortality through paperwork, through bureaucracy, through the simple act of writing everything down. The Sumerians would never rule themselves again. After 2004 BCE, they were subjects of Babylon, of Assyria, of Persia. Their language became liturgical, like Latin, used in temples, in schools, but not on the street. The last Sumerian speaker probably died around the time of Jesus. The last cuneiform tablet was written around 100 CE, 3,000 years of continuous written tradition, then silence. Before writing, justice was personal. Your brother steals your sheep, you take it back, or fight him, or ask your father to decide. Someone from another family kills your cousin. Your whole clan seeks revenge. Blood for blood. Endless cycles of retaliation. It worked in small groups. Everyone knew everyone. Social pressure kept things from spiraling, usually. But cities changed everything. Thousands of strangers living together. No family bonds. No clan loyalty. No social pressure from people you'd never see again. If someone cheated you in the market, what could you do? Fight them? Their family fights back. Soon the whole city is at war with itself. Cities needed something new. Impersonal justice. Rules that applied to everyone. Written down, publicly known, enforced by neutral parties. They needed law. The first laws weren't pretty or fair, but they were laws. The reforms of Urukagina, around 2350 BCE. First attempt we know of to limit royal power through written rules. He reduced taxes, freed debt slaves, protected widows and orphans, fired corrupt officials. Revolutionary stuff. So revolutionary that neighbouring cities invaded and destroyed him. But the idea survived. Then came Ur-Nammu. His code, around 2100 BCE, is the first complete legal system. Not just random rules, organised law. It starts with moral principles. The gods demand justice. The king provides it. The strong shouldn't oppress the weak. Orphans need protection. Standard weights and measures prevent fraud. Basic principles. Then specific cases. If a man commits murder, that man must be killed. Simple, clear, but most crimes weren't capital. If a man knocks out another man's tooth, he shall pay 2 shekels of silver. Not a tooth for a tooth, money for a tooth. This is sophisticated. It stops escalation, prevents feuds, turns violence into economics. You can't afford to hurt people, literally. The code distinguished between intentional and accidental. If a man accidentally kills another man's slave, he shall replace the slave. Accident. Replacement. But, if a man deliberately kills another man's slave, he shall replace the slave and pay additional compensation. Intent matters. State of mind affects punishment. That's complex legal thinking. Women's rights were protected. Sort of. If a man divorces his first wife, he shall pay 1 mina of silver. Divorce was legal, but expensive. If a wife is accused of adultery but the river ordeal proves her innocent, her accuser shall pay 3 shekels of silver. False accusation had consequences. The river ordeal? They'd throw the accused woman in the river. If she drowned, guilty. If she survived, innocent. The gods decided, not ideal, but better than mob justice. Contracts were sacred. Breaking them brought divine punishment, and legal punishment. Every contract needed witnesses, usually 5, their names recorded on the tablet, their seals pressed into clay. If dispute arose later, call the witnesses. If they're dead, check their seals. Forgery was punishable by death. You didn't fake contracts in Sumer. The courts were public, held at city gates where everyone could watch. Judges were usually elders, respected men, sometimes priests. They'd hear both sides, examine evidence, consult precedents. Previous similar cases, then render judgment, public judgment. Everyone knew what happened, who won, who lost, why, transparency as legitimacy. But here's the interesting part. You could appeal. If you didn't like the local court's decision, appeal to the provincial governor. Don't like his decision? Appeal to the king. The king's decision was final, theoretically. In practice, kings had better things to do than hear every dispute about sheep. But the possibility existed. Multi-level justice system, checks and balances. 4,000 years ago. Legal language developed. Specific phrases, technical terms. In perpetuity meant forever. Without contest meant no future claims. By mutual agreement meant both parties consented. Sound familiar? It should. Modern legal language descends directly from these ancient formulas. Lawyers have been talking like lawyers for 4,000 years. Professional judges appeared, not just respected elders, trained specialists, who knew all the precedents, all the procedures, all the loopholes. They were called diku, judgment makers. They studied previous cases, memorized standard penalties, learned to read complex contracts. The first legal professionals, the ancestors of every judge who ever put on a robe. Punishment varied by social class. This bothers modern sensibilities, but it was progress then. At least there were rules. Kill a free man, death penalty. Kill a slave, pay the owner 30 shekels. Injure a noble, pay 10 shekels. Injure a commoner, pay 5 shekels. Injure a slave, pay 2 shekels. Not equal, but predictable. You knew the consequences before you acted. Evidence mattered. Witnesses were best, documents good, physical evidence accepted. But if evidence was unclear, divine judgment, throw the accused in the river, make them hold hot iron, swear sacred oaths. The gods would reveal truth, except they didn't. So the clever and lucky survived. The weak and unlucky didn't, but it was better than pure force. Better than might makes right. Commercial law was sophisticated, partnerships, profit-sharing, limited liability, interest rates, bankruptcy, all codified. A merchant could borrow silver at 20% annual interest, invest in a trading expedition, if it failed. He owed only the principal plus interest, not everything he owned. Limited liability, protection for risk-takers, encouragement for commerce. Family law was complex, marriage contracts, divorce procedures, inheritance rules, adoption processes, all written down. A man could have multiple wives, but the first wife had special status. Her children inherited first. Unless she was barren, then the second wife's children inherited, unless the first wife adopted them. Then they were legally hers. Complicated? Yes, but it prevented succession wars. Mostly. Criminal law was harsh but not sadistic. Theft meant repaying 10 times the value. Couldn't pay. Slavery until you worked it off. False witness in a capital case? Death penalty. You don't lie when lives are at stake. Assault meant fines. Murder meant death. Unless it was accidental or justified. Or the victim was a slave. Lots of exceptions. Lots of nuance. The idea that law should be written. Public. Known to all. That was revolutionary. Before, justice was whatever the king decided, whatever the strong imposed. Now there were rules. Not perfect rules, not fair rules, but rules. Consistent, predictable. You could plan your life around them, know what was legal, what wasn't, what the consequences were. This idea spread everywhere. Babylon's code of Hammurabi borrowed heavily from Ur-Nammu. The Assyrians copied Babylonian law. The Persians learned from the Assyrians. The Greeks from the Persians. The Romans from the Greeks. Every legal system in the Western world traces back to these first attempts at written law. These clay tablets. These simple rules. If a man does X, the consequence is Y. Modern lawyers would recognize the bones of their profession in ancient Sumer. Contracts, precedents, appeals, evidence, testimony, cross-examination, legal language, professional judges. All of it started here, in these first cities, where strangers needed rules to live together, where justice had to be more than personal revenge, where law began. The Sumerians counted differently, not because they were weird, because they were practical. 10 fingers made decimal tempting. But 60? 60 was magic. You can divide it by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, 30. Try that with 10. You get 1, 2, 5, 10, that's it. When you're dividing grain among workers, 60 works better. No fractions. No arguments. Clean division. They didn't have 0. That came later. From India. But they had place value. The position told you the number's value. Like we do, but in base 60. So 1 could mean 1, or 60, or 3600, depending where it sat. Confusing? Sure, but powerful. You could write huge numbers with few symbols, calculate complex problems, all without 0, without decimals, just position and context. School tablets show their exercises, real ones. A field is 60 sa, its length exceeds its width by 10. What are the dimensions? That's a quadratic equation. They're solving x times x plus 10 equals 60 in 2500 BCE. 1,000 years before the Greeks invented geometry. The answer? Length is 30, width is 20. They got it right. Every time. They knew Pythagoras' theorem, not his name. He wasn't born yet. But the concept. One tablet called Plimpton 322 lists Pythagorean triples, sets of 3 numbers where a squared plus b squared equals c squared, like 3, 4, 5, or 5, 12, 13. They had dozens, used them for construction, making sure corners were square, walls were straight, foundations were solid. The area of triangles, easy, half base times height. Area of trapezoids. They had formulas, volume of truncated pyramids. They could calculate it. This wasn't abstract mathematics, it was practical. How much grain fits in this storage bin? How many bricks for that wall? How much seed for this field? Math was survival. Get it wrong, people starve. Fractions were written as parts of 60. Half was 30. Third was 20. Quarter was 15. But they also had special symbols for common fractions. 2/3, 5/6. These showed up constantly in ration distributions. 2/3 of a siler of oil, 5/6 of a gur of barley, precise, fair, mathematical. Interest calculations were sophisticated. They understood compound interest. If you borrow 1 mina of silver at 20% annual interest for 5 years, you owe... They could tell you. Exactly. They had tables, like our multiplication tables, but for interest. Look up the time. Look up the rate. Find your answer. Babylonian bankers used these same tables 1,000 years later. Then there were the stars. Every night priests climbed the ziggurats, watched the sky, recorded what they saw. Venus rising, Mars in retrograde, the moon's phases. They did this for centuries, generations, building data sets, looking for patterns, finding them. They identified 5 planets: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, named them after gods: Nebel the messenger, Ishtar the lover, Nogol the warrior, Marduk the king, Ninurta the farmer. These weren't just lights. They were deities moving through heaven. Their movements meant something. Wars, floods, good harvests, bad kings. The gods were writing messages in the sky. The calendar was their masterpiece, and their headache. The moon gives you months, about 29.5 days each. 12 lunar months, 354 days. But the solar year is 365.225 days. 11 days off. After 3 years, you're a month off. Your spring festivals happen in winter, your harvest celebrations come during planting. Chaos. So they added leap months, not randomly. They found a pattern. 7 leap months every 19 years keeps the calendar aligned. The Metonic cycle, named after a Greek who discovered it in 432 BCE. But the Sumerians knew it 2,000 years earlier. They just didn't name it after themselves. They divided the day into 12 double hours, each double hour into 60 minutes, each minute into 60 seconds. Sound familiar? You're using their system right now. check your watch. Those numbers trace back to Sumerian priests timing star movements, needing precise measurements, creating a system so good we still use it. The zodiac started here, not the full system, that came later, but the idea that stars form patterns, that the sun moves through these patterns annually, that being born under certain stars shapes your destiny. They identified the main constellations, the bull, the lion, the scorpion, still in our zodiac today. Eclipse prediction was possible, sort of. They knew eclipses came in cycles. Every 223 lunar months the pattern repeats. These are a cycle. If there's a lunar eclipse today, there'll be a similar one 18 years, 11 days, 8 hours from now. They couldn't explain why, didn't know about orbits, but they could predict. That's power. Tell the king when the moon will disappear. You're either a prophet or a witch. Better be right. Mathematical texts weren't just practical. Some were playful. A number exceeds its seventh by 6. What is the number? That's algebra. X equals x to 7 plus 6. Answer: 7. They were playing with numbers, exploring relationships, doing math for fun, for curiosity, for the joy of solving problems. They created the 360-degree circle. Why 360? Close to the days in a year, divisible by lots of numbers. Works with their base 60 system, 6 times 60, perfect for astronomy, for navigation, for architecture. Every protractor in every classroom uses their system, every GPS calculation, every architectural blueprint. Weights and measures were standardized. The shekel, about 8.3 grams. The mina, 60 shekels. The talent, 60 minas. These weren't just arbitrary. They were based on barley. 1 grain of barley was the smallest unit. 180 grains made a shekel. Natural standards, agricultural origins, but precise enough for international trade. The abacus probably started here, not the Chinese version. Earlier, simpler. Clay tokens on a board, moving them to calculate, add, subtract, multiply, divide, physical mathematics, tangible numbers. You could see the math happening, feel it, understand it through manipulation. They understood proportion, similar triangles. If a tree's shadow is 20 cubits when a 1-cubit stick's shadow is 2 cubits, the tree is 10 cubits tall, simple, but revolutionary, measuring the unmeasurable, finding heights without climbing, distances without walking, mathematics as a tool for understanding the unreachable. Astronomical diaries were kept for centuries, dry stuff mostly. Month 3, day 15, Jupiter visible, 2 fingers above the moon. But accumulated over time, powerful. Patterns emerged. Predictions became possible. Not astrology, astronomy. Real science, based on observation, recording, pattern recognition, mathematics. The sexagesimal system spread everywhere. Babylon, Assyria, Greece, India. Islamic mathematicians used it. European astronomers adopted it. We still use it. Every time you check the time, navigate by GPS, measure an angle, calculate coordinates, you're using Sumerian mathematics, their gift to every civilization that followed. Sumer had a problem, a big one. They had no natural resources, no metal for tools, no stone for building, no tall trees for construction, just mud, lots of mud, and 2 rivers. That's it. This should have doomed them. Instead, it made them the world's first international traders. Necessity created commerce. They had 2 things others wanted: food surplus from irrigation agriculture, and location, sitting between everyone else. Want to trade between Iran and Syria? Go through Sumer, India to Turkey, through Sumer. They were the middlemen of the ancient world, taking a cut of everything that passed through. The rivers were highways. The Tigris and Euphrates connected them to the Persian Gulf. From there, the whole Indian Ocean. Boats were simple at first. Reed bundles coated with bitumen, natural asphalt that bubbled up from the ground. Waterproof, flexible, could carry maybe a ton, not much but enough to start. By 3000 BCE, they had real boats, wood imported from Lebanon, 60 feet long, 20 tons capacity, sails and oars, could handle ocean voyages, not comfortable, not safe, but profitable. One successful voyage could make you rich. One shipwreck could destroy you. High risk, high reward, capitalism before capital. The Dilmun trade was crucial. Modern Bahrain. 2 weeks by boat. Perfect position. Connected to everywhere. Sumerians called it paradise. Where the sun rises, where sweet water flows, marketing speak. It was actually hot, dry, boring, but it had pearls and connections. Dilmun merchants reached India. Arabia, Africa. They were the Amazon of the Bronze Age. Everything flowed through them. From Dilmun came copper from Magan, Oman, the best copper in the ancient world. Pure, easy to work, essential for bronze, tools, weapons, agricultural implements. Without Magan copper, Sumerian civilization couldn't function. They needed tons, literally. One tablet records a shipment of 20 tons of copper. That's one ship, one voyage. From Meluha came exotics, probably the Indus Valley, modern Pakistan, carnelian, redstone for jewellery, lapis lazuli, bluestone more valuable than gold, ivory, exotic woods, peacocks, monkeys, things that screamed wealth, status, international connections. A Sumerian noble wearing Meluhan carnelian was saying, "I'm connected, I'm powerful, I'm rich." But here's the genius part. They didn't just trade, they invented trade, letters of credit. A merchant in Ur could write a tablet promising payment, send it with a caravan. The recipient in Assyria could redeem it, like a check, but 4,000 years ago. This required trust, reputation, legal systems, all of which Sumer created. Merchant families became dynasties. The Enasir family, the Sinkashid house, names that appear in tablets across centuries. They had agents in different cities, warehouses, ships, caravans, regular routes, established customers, brand recognition. These weren't just traders. They were corporations, international businesses with branches, employees, and standardized practices. The standard commercial letter was formulaic. Say to my brother, your brother says, "I am well. May you be well. Regarding the copper you sent, the quality is terrible. I am returning it. Send better copper or return my silver." Thousands of these letters survive. Complaints mostly. People only wrote when things went wrong. Like online reviews. The angry customers are loudest. Inasiravur is famous for complaints. Tablet after tablet of angry customers. The copper you sent is not good. You promised delivery and failed. You have treated me with contempt. This guy kept the complaints. In his house. Archaeologists found a room full of them. Why? Trophy collection? Evidence for lawsuits? Or just a businessman who didn't care about customer satisfaction? Weights and measures had to be standard. A shekel in Ur had to equal a shekel in Babylon, or trade collapses. So they created standards. Physical standards, stone weights kept in temples, official measures, checked regularly. Merchants caught using false weights? Huge fines, sometimes death. You don't mess with the foundation of commerce. The talent mina shekel system spread everywhere. 60 shekels to a mina, 60 minas to a talent, about 30 kilograms. Large transactions used talents, small ones used shekels, medium used minas, like dollars and cents, but based on 60. Because Sumerians loved 60, it made division easier. Splitting payments, calculating shares, no decimals needed. Contracts were detailed, written on clay, witnessed, sealed, stored. One contract from Ur describes a partnership. 3 merchants pooling resources. One provides silver, one provides the boat, one travels with the goods. Profits split equally. Losses too. Limited liability partnership. In 2000 BCE, modern business structures with ancient origins. Trade routes were established and protected. The tin road from Assur to Anatolia, the lapis road from Afghanistan, the incense road from Arabia. Caravans followed these routes for millennia. Same stops, same timing, same merchandise. Merchants knew every watering hole, every dangerous pass, every corrupt official who needed bribing. Donkeys were the trucks of the ancient world. Could carry 90 kilograms, travel 25 miles a day, eat anything, survive anywhere. One tablet records a caravan of 300 donkeys. That's 27 tons of cargo, moving at walking speed, taking months, but connecting cities thousands of miles apart, creating the first global economy. River trade was faster, cheaper, more reliable. Downstream was easy, let the current work. Upstream was hard, teams of men pulling boats with ropes, or sailing when wind permitted. River pilots knew every sandbar, every seasonal change, every place pirates might strike. Specialized knowledge passed father to son. Markets formed at natural points, where rivers met, where roads crossed, where city walls created checkpoints. These became permanent. Daily markets for food, weekly markets for crafts, monthly markets for livestock, annual fairs for international goods, the rhythm of commerce creating the rhythm of life. Prices fluctuated with supply and demand. One tablet shows barley prices over a decade. Cheap after good harvests, expensive during droughts. Smart merchants stored grain when cheap, sold when expensive. Speculation, futures markets, commodity trading, all recognizable to modern traders, all invented in Sumerian markets. Credit was essential. Most people had no silver. They paid after harvest, bought on account, borrowed for emergencies. Interest rates were high, 20% for silver, 33% for grain, but available. You could borrow, start a business, take risks, sometimes win, often lose. But the possibility existed. Economic mobility through credit. International law developed from trade disputes. What happens when a Sumerian merchant cheats an Elamite customer? Which laws apply? Which courts judge? Treaties were negotiated, standards established. Reciprocal enforcement agreed. The beginning of international commercial law. Because trade requires trust, and trust requires enforcement. By 2000 BCE, Sumerian trade networks reached from India to Egypt, from Anatolia to Arabia. Goods, ideas, technologies, diseases, all flowing along trade routes, connecting humanity in ways never seen before. The Silk Road? That came 1,500 years later, but the idea, the practice, the institutions, all started in Sumer, with merchants who had no resources except location and ambition. The collapse of these networks contributed to Sumer's fall. Wars disrupted routes. Pirates increased. Trust eroded. Trade shifted north to Babylon, west to the Mediterranean. The great merchant houses failed. One by one, their tablets stop appearing. Their seals disappear. The first global economy collapsed. But the idea survived. Trade as civilization's lifeblood. Commerce as connection. Business as human universal. Women in Sumer had rights that wouldn't return to some parts of the world until the 1900s. They could own land, run businesses, divorce their husbands, go to court, sign contracts, things women in Victorian England couldn't do. But don't imagine equality. This was still a man's world, just one where women had more room to move than they would for the next 4,000 years. Start with property. A woman could own it, inherit it, buy it, sell it. Tablets show women purchasing fields, houses, orchards. One woman named Ama-E bought 3 houses and a date palm grove. Paid in silver, her seal on the contract. No male guardian mentioned. Her money, her decision, her property. Marriage wasn't slavery. It was a contract. Negotiated, with terms. The bride's family provided a dowry, but she kept ownership. If divorced, she took it with her. If widowed, it stayed hers. Not her husband's family, hers. The groom paid a bride price to her father, but also gave gifts to her. personal property, jewellery, clothes, sometimes land. Divorce meant she kept those too. Speaking of divorce, women could initiate it. Not easily, but possibly. If a husband was cruel, neglectful, failed to provide, a woman could go to court, present her case. If judges agreed, divorce granted. She took her dowry, her personal property, sometimes additional compensation. One tablet records a woman divorcing her husband for impotence. She won, got her dowry plus damages, but here's the dark side. Adultery laws were unequal. A man could have concubines, visit prostitutes. No legal consequences. A woman accused of adultery, river ordeal. Thrown in the water. If she drowned, guilty. If she survived, innocent. The gods decided, except the gods were strangely biased. Strong swimmers were innocent. Weak ones were guilty. Justice by lung capacity. Taverns were women's domain. Brewing beer, selling it. Running inns. This was female work. Respectable female work. These weren't brothels. Well, not primarily. They were businesses, social centres, meeting places. The tavern keeper, usually called alewife, was often wealthy, independent, powerful in her community. She extended credit, held goods in storage, knew everyone's business. The most famous was Kubaba, started as a tavern keeper, ended as Queen of Kish, the only woman on the Sumerian king list. How? Nobody knows. The story just says she strengthened the foundations of Kish, whatever that means. But a tavern keeper became queen. That tells you something about social mobility, and about the power of controlling the beer supply. Priestesses were the ultimate power women. The priestess of Inanna at Uruk, the high priestess of Nanna at Ur. These weren't just religious positions. They controlled vast estates, thousands of workers, massive wealth. They conducted diplomacy, signed treaties, corresponded with kings as equals, sometimes as superiors. Enheduanna, daughter of Sargon, was high priestess of Ur, also the world's first named author. She wrote hymns, beautiful, complex hymns, blending Sumerian and Akkadian traditions, religious poetry as political propaganda. Her work was copied for centuries, studied in schools. She shaped religious thought across Mesopotamia, a woman's words carrying divine authority. But most priestesses weren't that powerful. The Naditu women dedicated to Shamash lived in cloisters, couldn't marry, couldn't have children, but could own property, run businesses. Many became wealthy merchants, lending money, trading goods, free from husbands, free from childbearing, free to focus on profit. Textile production was women's work, and big business. The textile factories of Ur employed thousands of women, working in huge workshops, spinning, weaving, dyeing. It was hard work, repetitive, but paid work. Women earned their own money. Tablets show them buying property with their wages, supporting families, even lending money at interest. The work was organized. Supervisors, quotas, quality control. One tablet lists 6,742 women working in a single textile operation. That's a major industry. These weren't housewives weaving for pin money. They were industrial workers, producing goods for international trade. Sumerian textiles reached Egypt, India, Anatolia, woven by women's hands. Prostitution existed. Legal, regulated, taxed, but stratified. At the top, the temple prostitutes. If they existed, scholars fight about this, but tablets mention women dedicated to Inanna who performed sacred sexual acts. High status, wealthy, educated, not common prostitutes. Those worked in taverns, on streets. Lower status, but still legal, still part of society. Motherhood was dangerous. No antibiotics, no proper surgery. Childbirth killed women regularly, 1 in 10 maybe. Tablets contained prayers for safe delivery, contracts for wet nurses, arrangements for orphans. Death in childbirth was so common it shaped society. Second wives, adoption, extended family raising children, systems to handle maternal mortality. Education for girls was rare but not unknown. Most scribes were men, but female scribes existed. Their names appear on tablets: Ninbanda, Gemeti, Amatmamu. Not many, but some. They usually worked in temples, or for other women, female scribes for female clients, a small but real professional class. Legal testimony from women was accepted, but worth less than men's. 2 women's testimony equaled 1 man's, unless it was about women's matters. Childbirth, marriage contracts, female property. Then women's testimony carried full weight. The law recognized female expertise in female domains. Inheritance was complex. Sons inherited first, but daughters weren't excluded. They got dowries, sometimes land. If there were no sons, daughters could inherit everything. One tablet describes 3 sisters inheriting their father's trading business, running it successfully, expanding it, passing it to their children. Royal women had real power. Queens weren't just decorative. They had their own seals, signed documents, controlled property. Queen Poppy's tomb at Ur contained incredible wealth and sacrificed attendants. 23 bodies, guards, musicians, servants, following their queen to the afterlife. That's not the tomb of a figurehead. That's power. Terrible power. Medicine recognized women's health. Gynecological texts survive. Treatments for menstrual problems, pregnancy issues, childbirth complications, not good treatments, prayers and potions mostly, but acknowledgement that women's bodies needed specific care. Female midwives provided most obstetric care, male doctors for other issues. Daily life for ordinary women was hard. Grinding grain before dawn, fetching water, cooking, cleaning, weaving, childcare, elder care, all the invisible work that keeps society functioning, but also managing household economies, buying, selling, trading, making decisions, not powerless, just exhausted. Women's religious roles went beyond priestesses. Every household had shrines, women maintained them, made offerings, said prayers, taught children the stories, the myths, the proper rituals. They were the keepers of tradition, the transmitters of culture. Without them, Sumerian religion dies in 1 generation. Old age brought respect. Postmenopausal women gained freedom, no pregnancy risk. Children grown, husbands often dead. They could travel, trade, take lovers. One tablet mentions a 60-year-old woman buying a 20-year-old slave for household duties. Sure, household duties. Even the ancient Sumerians had cougars. The gradual restriction of women's rights is visible in the tablets. Early Sumerian texts show more female property owners, more female witnesses, more female merchants. By the Other 3 period, fewer. By the Old Babylonian period, much fewer. The society became more militarized, more centralized. Women's sphere shrank, a pattern repeated throughout history. But here's what's remarkable. We know these women existed. Their names, their jobs, their property, their complaints, their victories, because they left records, tablets, seals, contracts, letters. They insisted on being documented, on leaving traces, on being remembered, and 4,000 years later we remember Ninbanda the scribe, Kubaba the tavern keeper, Enheduanna the poet, names that outlasted empires. Nobody taught the Sumerians how to build cities. They were making it up, every wall, every street, every drainage ditch, all experiments. Some worked, some didn't. The ones that worked got copied, improved, standardized. Eventually they created the template every city would follow, but first they had to invent everything from scratch. Start with the material. Mud. That's all they had. The alluvial soil of Mesopotamia. Mix it with water. Add straw for strength. Pack it into wooden moulds. Leave it in the sun. Voila. Mud bricks. Not very strong individually, but stack thousands together. You can build anything. Walls, houses, temples, entire cities from mud. The problem with mud? Water. Rain dissolves mud bricks. Floods destroy them. So they learned to waterproof. Bitumen, natural asphalt that bubbled from the ground. Coat the bricks. seal the joints, creates a waterproof barrier, also works for boats, baskets, anything that needs to stay dry. First petroleum product, first waterproofing, still used today in modified form. They invented the arch around 4000 BCE, not the decorative Roman arch, the functional arch, for doorways, drains, storage rooms. They understood the principle, weight distributed along the curve, each brick supporting its neighbours. No keystone needed, just careful construction, precise angles. The physics of compression turned into architecture. The ziggurat was their signature building, started as simple platforms, raising temples above flood level. Then they got ambitious, stack platforms on platforms, create artificial mountains. The great ziggurat of Ur had 3 levels, maybe 4, 70 feet high, 3 monumental staircases, drainage systems built into the core, weep holes to release moisture. These weren't primitive. They were engineered. Urban planning appeared by 2500 BCE, not the organic growth of early Uruk. Deliberate design, main streets wide enough for carts, side streets for foot traffic, districts for different activities, potters here, metalworkers there, residential neighbourhoods, temple districts, palace complexes, market areas, logical organisation, functional zoning, city planning. Drainage was crucial. Rain was rare but intense. Flash floods could destroy a city. So they built storm drains, clay pipes under streets, catch basins at intersections, outflow channels to rivers or reservoirs. Some drains were big enough to walk through. Maintenance tunnels, cleaned regularly, because blocked drains meant flooded streets, disease, death. Houses evolved from simple to complex. Early houses were one room, mud brick walls, reed roof, door. That's it. By 2500 BCE, courtyard houses, rooms arranged around an open centre, kitchen, storage, living spaces, flat roofs for sleeping in summer. Some houses had 2 stories. The rich had 3, indoor plumbing for the wealthy, clay pipes carrying waste to street drains. The courtyard was brilliant design, light and air in the centre, privacy from the street, space for cooking, working, socialising, children playing, safe from traffic, protected from strangers. The courtyard house design spread across the Mediterranean, still used today because it works, always has. City walls were massive undertakings. Uruk's wall was 6 miles long, 30 feet high, 15 feet thick at the base, 900 defensive towers. Building it required millions of bricks, thousands of workers, years of labour. But once built, the city was safe, mostly, until siege engines got better. The engineering was sophisticated. Walls weren't just tall, they had foundations, deep foundations, below flood level, below undermining level. They had buttresses for strength, crenellations for defence, gates with multiple chambers, kill zones, portcullises, everything later medieval castles would use, invented here first. Temples required special techniques. They had to last forever. Gods demanded permanence, so they used baked bricks, not sun-dried, kiln-fired, much stronger, more expensive, but permanent. They used copper foundation deposits, magic protection, but also practical. Copper doesn't rust, marks the building's corners forever. Archaeological gift of future excavators. Acoustic engineering appeared in temples. Certain room dimensions amplified sound. The high priest's voice carried throughout the space. No microphones, just physics, standing waves, resonance. They didn't understand the science, but they knew what worked, built it into their temples. Divine voices needed divine amplification. Canals were city arteries, bringing water, removing waste, enabling transport, but they required constant maintenance. Silt buildup, bank erosion, seasonal variations. Canal inspectors monitored flow. Work gangs cleared blockages. Engineers reinforced banks. Because a failed canal meant a dead city, no water, no food, no life. The labour organisation was impressive. Building a ziggurat required different specialists. Brickmakers, bricklayers, plasterers, roofers, drainage experts, supervisors, feeding them all, housing them, organizing schedules, managing supplies, quality control, dispute resolution, project management on massive scale, skills that built pyramids, cathedrals, skyscrapers, all learned here first. Reed architecture hasn't survived, but it housed most people, bundles of reeds, bent into arches, covered with mats, plastered with mud. Cool in summer, warm in winter, cheap, quick, flexible. The marsh Arabs of southern Iraq still build this way. Same techniques, same materials, 5,000 years of continuous tradition. Public buildings served multiple functions. Markets weren't just for commerce. They were social centres, news exchanges, entertainment venues, court proceedings, political announcements. The architecture reflected this. Open spaces, covered areas, platforms for speakers, storage for goods, multi-use design. Because space in cities was precious. Innovation came from problems. Foundation sinking, invent pile driving, walls cracking, add buttresses, roofs leaking, better waterproofing. Each failure taught something. Each success got standardized. Building codes developed. Not written, but understood. This is how you build a wall. This is how you lay drainage. This is how you construct a roof. Accumulated wisdom becoming tradition. Sacred geometry influenced design. Certain proportions were holy, certain numbers divine. Temples faced specific directions, aligned with stars, oriented to catch first light, or last light, or equinox light. The architecture encoded religious meaning, mathematical relationships, astronomical observations, buildings as cosmology made physical. The scale is staggering. Rook covered 6 square miles, nearly as large. Populations of 50,000 plus. These weren't villages, they were metropolises, requiring infrastructure we associate with modern cities, water distribution, waste management, traffic control, public spaces, administrative buildings, all invented here in mud brick, by people figuring it out as they went. Fire was a constant threat. Mud brick doesn't burn, but roofs do, contents do, entire districts could be destroyed. Fire breaks were built into city plans, wide streets, open spaces, regulations about cooking fires, storage of flammable materials. Fire brigades? Maybe. Bucket brigades certainly, because one house burning could take a whole neighborhood. By 2000 BCE, Sumerian architectural knowledge had spread everywhere. Egypt, India, Anatolia. Different materials, local variations, but same principles. Cities need walls, drainage, districts, public spaces. Temples need prominence, houses need courtyards. These weren't just buildings. They were ideas. Urban ideas, spreading with trade, conquest, migration. The Sumerian invention of the city becoming humanity's dominant habitat. When you got sick in ancient Sumer, you had 2 options, the Asyu or the Ashipu. The Asyu was a physician, used drugs, surgery, practical treatments. The Ashipu was an exorcist, used spells, rituals, prayers. Most people used both. Cover all bases. Maybe the fever was from infection, maybe from demons. Why take chances? The medical texts are fascinating and frustrating. They describe symptoms precisely. If a man's temple throbs, his eyes water, his throat burns, and he cannot swallow, that's clearly describing something specific. Strep throat, tonsillitis. But then the treatment. Crush a turtle shell, mix with beer, have him drink while facing east. Not exactly antibiotics, but some treatments worked. They used willow bark for pain. Willow contains salicin, the active ingredient in aspirin. They used poppy extract for severe pain. That's opium. They applied mouldy bread to wounds. Penicillin, accidentally. They didn't know why these worked, just that they did. Thousands of years of trial and error. Keep what works, forget what doesn't. Surgery was real and scary. They set broken bones, not perfectly but adequately, They drained abscesses, removed cataracts. One text describes cataract surgery in detail. Bronze needle, insert at the corner of the eye, push the clouded lens down, partial vision restored. Terrifying, but it worked. Sometimes, when infection didn't kill you, they understood wound care. Clean the wound, pack with herbs, bandage with linen, change regularly. One text says, if the wound stinks, it is angry. If it stays clean, it will heal. They noticed infection, didn't understand bacteria, but recognized the signs, smell, pus, red streaks, death approaching. They just didn't know how to stop it. Diagnosis was systematic. Physicians examined patients head to toe, checked eyes, tongue, pulse, urine. Yes, they tasted urine. Sweet urine meant wasting disease. Diabetes. They couldn't treat it, but they could diagnose it. Tell the patient to get their affairs in order. Sometimes diagnosis is all medicine can offer. The drug list is extensive, plants mostly, minerals, animal products, myrrh for infection, cannabis for pain, licorice for stomach problems, mercury for skin diseases. That last one was toxic, but it did kill parasites, along with occasionally killing the patient. Medicine is always about acceptable risks. Mental illness was recognized, but misunderstood. Depression was heart disease, not cardiac. Emotional. Anxiety was wandering uterus in women, possession in men. Treatments included isolation, beatings, prayers, drugs, sometimes just time. They noticed some people recovered spontaneously, others didn't. The mystery of madness unsolved. Gynecology was surprisingly developed. They had treatments for irregular menstruation, pregnancy tests using barley and wheat. The woman urinated on both. If barley grew, boy. Wheat grew, girl. Neither grew, not pregnant. Sounds crazy, but modern tests show it's slightly better than chance. Hormones in pregnant urine affect seed germination. They noticed patterns we're just now explaining. Childbirth was woman's work. Midwives delivered babies. Male doctors stayed away unless complications arose. Then they might try to turn a breech baby, or use hooks to extract a dead fetus. Brutal, dangerous, often fatal. Caesarean sections were performed, but only on dead or dying mothers, to save the baby, or try to. Public health existed, sort of. They had quarantine rules. If a man has the disease that spreads, he must stay outside the city for 7 days. They noticed contagion, person-to-person transmission. They just thought it was demons jumping between hosts. Right observation, wrong explanation. But the isolation still worked. Veterinary medicine developed alongside human medicine. Sick animals meant starvation, so animal doctors were essential. They treated oxen, donkeys, sheep, even dogs. One text describes treating a horse with colic. Walk it constantly. Don't let it roll. Give it beer mixed with oil. Modern treatment is surprisingly similar, minus the beer. Medical training was apprenticeship. Father to son usually. Sometimes uncle to nephew. Rarely master to unrelated student. It took years. Learning to read medical texts, recognize symptoms, prepare drugs, perform procedures. Most importantly, learning when not to treat. If the patient will die, do not treat. Your reputation matters more than false hope. The Code of Hammurabi included medical malpractice laws, based on earlier Sumerian precedents. If a surgeon saved a noble's life, 10 shekels silver. If the patient died, the surgeon's hands were cut off. If a slave died, replace the slave. Different values for different lives. But accountability for medical errors, professional responsibility enforced by law. Preventive medicine was minimal but existent. Wash your hands before eating. Don't drink water that smells bad. Avoid sick people during plague times. Common sense, but written down, codified, made official medical advice, the beginning of public health policy. Dental care was basic. They knew teeth problems could kill, abscesses spreading to the brain, so they pulled infected teeth. With bronze pliers, No anesthesia except maybe opium or alcohol. They made false teeth from human or animal teeth, tied with gold wire for the wealthy only. The poor just gummed their food. The placebo effect was well utilized, even if they didn't understand it. Elaborate rituals, impressive incantations, mysterious ingredients. The more complex the treatment, the better it worked, for certain conditions, the ones affected by belief, by hope, by the power of suggestion. They were master showmen, medicine as theatre. Specialized medicine emerged. Eye doctors, bone setters, wound specialists, even psychiatrists of a sort, called physicians of the soul. They treated emotional problems with talk, music, occupation, temple service. Sometimes it worked. Connection, purpose, community. The same things that help depression today. Medical records were kept. Patient histories, successful treatments, failed remedies, building a knowledge base. One tablet is a medical student's notebook. Cases he'd seen, treatments tried, outcomes noted, learning from experience, from failure, from success. The scientific method in embryonic form. The tension between supernatural and natural medicine never resolved. Was disease divine punishment? Demon possession? Natural imbalance? Bad air? They hedged their bets. Treat everything. Pray to gods. Expel demons. Give drugs. Perform surgery. Something might work. And if nothing worked, at least you tried everything. The patient died despite best efforts. Not because of neglect. Every culture has a flood story. But the Sumerians told it first. At least they wrote it down first, around 2100 BCE. But the story was already old then, passed down orally for who knows how long. The hero's name changes, Ziusudra, Atrahasis Utnapishtim. But the story stays the same. The gods decide to destroy humanity. One man is warned, builds a boat, saves life on Earth. Sound familiar? In the Sumerian version, the gods are annoyed. Humans are too noisy. They can't sleep. Enlil, king of gods, says, "Enough. Kill them all." The other gods agree. Mostly. But Enki, god of wisdom and water, likes humans. He warns his favourite Ziusudra, not directly. That would break divine law. He speaks to a wall, knowing Ziusudra is listening behind it. Wall, build a boat, save yourself. Plausible deniability, divine style. The instructions are specific. The boat should be as wide as it is long. Cover it above and below. Take the seed of all living things. That's not a boat. That's a box. A cube. A giant floating container. Completely unseaworthy, but unsinkable. It can't capsize, can't flip. Just bobs like a cork. Maybe the gods knew what they were doing. Ziusudra builds it. Loads his family. Loads animals. Clean animals and unclean. Birds and creeping things. Then the storm comes. 7 days. 7 nights. The south wind blew. The tempest raged. The flood waters rose. Darkness covered the land. The gods themselves were frightened by the deluge. Even the gods didn't expect it to be this bad. When it's over, the gods have regrets, especially Inanna. How could I speak evil in the assembly? Order destruction of my people. I gave birth to humanity. Now they float like fish spawn in the sea. Divine remorse. The gods realizing they've gone too far, wiped out their worshippers. Who's going to feed them now? Make offerings? Build temples? Oops. Ziusudra opens a window, releases a dove. It returns. Nowhere to land. He waits. Releases a swallow. It returns. Still water everywhere. Finally a raven. It doesn't return. It found land. Found food. The waters are receding. He lands on a mountain. Makes offerings. The gods smell the sweet smoke. Gather like flies. They're starving. No offerings during the flood. They need humans. Decide never to do this again. As reward, Ziusudra becomes immortal. He and his wife, the only humans to escape death. They're sent to live at the mouth of the rivers, far from other humans, because immortality among mortals would cause problems. jealousy, worship, complications. Better to separate them, let them live forever elsewhere. But here's the interesting part. There's geological evidence. Around 2900 BCE, massive flooding in Mesopotamia. Not worldwide, but regionally devastating. Flood deposits at multiple sites. Urar, Kish, Shurapak. 8 feet of clean clay between occupation layers. Break in habitation. Something big happened. Big enough to inspire stories. Big enough to become myth. Or maybe it's older. The Black Sea Deluge hypothesis. Around 5600 BCE, the Mediterranean broke through the Bosphorus, flooded the Black Sea basin, catastrophically. People living there would have fled, carrying stories of the water that wouldn't stop rising, stories that became the flood myth, spread across cultures, each adding their own details. The biblical version comes later, much later. Noah instead of Zeusudra, 40 days instead of 7, a rainbow covenant instead of immortality. But the bones are the same. Divine anger, one righteous man, a boat, animals, a flood, a mountain, a sacrifice, divine promise. The Hebrews learned it during Babylonian exile, adapted it, made it monotheistic, made it moral. The Sumerian gods were annoyed. Yahweh was disappointed in human evil. Different cultures, different meanings. For Sumerians, it's about divine caprice. Gods can destroy you for any reason, or no reason. Better keep them happy. For Hebrews, it's about justice. God punishes evil, saves righteousness. There's logic to divine action. For moderns, it's about environment, climate change, natural disasters, human vulnerability to forces beyond control. The story served political purposes. Kings claimed descent from flood survivors, legitimacy through catastrophe. My ancestor was chosen by gods to preserve life. That's why I should rule. The flood as historical divide. Everything before, mythical, and possibly long reigns. Gods walking earth. Everything after, historical. Normal lifespans. Human kings. The flood is boundary between myth and history. Multiple versions existed simultaneously. The Sumerian version, the Akkadian Atrahasis epic, the Babylonian Gilgamesh episode, each emphasizing different aspects, different lessons, but all agreeing on basics. There was a flood. It was divine. One family survived. Life restarted. Humanity got a second chance. The flood story addresses existential questions. Why do we die? Because the gods decided immortality was too dangerous after the flood. Why do we suffer? Because the gods can destroy us any time. Why should we worship? Because the gods need us as much as we need them. Mutual dependence. The flood establishing the divine-human relationship. Archaeological excavations in the 1920s caused sensation. Leonard Woolley at found the flood layer, announced he'd found proof of Noah's flood. Headlines worldwide. But then other sites showed different flood layers, different times, multiple floods, not one universal deluge. Many local catastrophes, each contributing to the myth. The story's persistence is remarkable. Told for 5,000 years, adapted by multiple religions, still told today, still meaningful, because floods still happen, cities still drown, people still need stories about survival, about second chances, about starting over after everything's lost. The Sumerian flood story isn't just ancient history, it's human psychology, encoded in narrative, preserved in clay. Modern climate change gives it new relevance. Rising seas, stronger storms, coastal flooding. We're living our own flood story. Will we be Zeusudra, building boats? Or the unnamed masses drowning in divine displeasure? The story warns, prepares, reminds. Natural forces don't care about human plans. The gods or nature can wash everything away. The only question is whether someone survives to tell the story. Death in Sumer wasn't an ending. It was a relocation, a permanent move to Irkalla, the land of no return, located deep underground, ruled by Ereshkigal, sister of Inanna, a place of dust and darkness where everyone went, kings and beggars, priests and prostitutes, all equal in death, all equally miserable. The journey started immediately after death. The spirit called Giddim separated from the body, but stayed nearby, confused, hungry, angry. For 7 days it lingered. That's why proper burial was urgent. An unburied body meant a restless ghost, haunting the living, causing sickness, bad luck, nightmares. The dead demanded respect, or else. The burial itself was elaborate, even for commoners. The body was washed, dressed in best clothes, laid on its side, knees bent like sleeping. Personal items placed around it, pottery, tools, jewellery, food and drink for the journey, a small boat sometimes, for crossing the underground river. Everything needed for the afterlife, because the dead kept needing things. Royal burials were something else. Queen Puabi's tomb at 23 bodies, attendants who followed her in death, musicians with their instruments, guards with weapons, servants with supplies. Did they volunteer? Were they drugged? Forced? We don't know. But they went, dressed in finest clothes, arranged perfectly, ready to serve their queen forever. The journey to Akala took 7 days, through 7 gates. At each gate the dead surrendered something. Clothes at the first, jewellery at the second, dignity at the third. By the 7th gate they arrived naked, powerless, nothing left but their name, standing before Ereshkigal and the Anunnaki, the 7 judges, not for judgment of sins, just registration. Recording, you're dead now. Here's your spot. Enjoy eternity. Life in the underworld was grim. The dead ate dust, drank muddy water, sat in darkness. No joy, no pain, just existence, endless, unchanging. The Sumerian afterlife wasn't punishment or reward, it was just less. Less than life, less than hope, less than anything worth wanting, which is why they clung to life so desperately. But there were degrees of misery. The dead with many sons fared better. Sons made offerings, food, beer, water. The dead could consume the essence, made death slightly less awful. The dead with no descendants, they became beggars, scrounging scraps, fighting over offerings meant for others. Family mattered, even after death. Monthly offerings were essential. The 29th day of each month was devoted to the dead. Families gathered at graves, poured beer into offering pipes, clay tubes that reached down to the burial, direct delivery to the deceased. They'd call the dead by name. Father, here is beer. Mother, here is bread. Maintaining relationships across the boundary of death. Dreams were visits from the dead, taken seriously. If your dead father appeared in a dream asking for beer, you'd better provide it. Next morning, at his grave, because unhappy dead caused problems, illness, accidents, crop failure, business losses, the dead had power, limited, but real. Best to keep them satisfied. Necromancy was practiced, illegal, but common. People wanted to talk to the dead, get advice, learn the future, find hidden treasures. Special priests working in secret claimed they could summon spirits, using rituals, offerings, magic words, dangerous work. The dead didn't like being disturbed, might curse the summoner, or lie, or demand impossible payments. Ghosts were a constant problem. Not all dead went quietly to Erkala. Some got lost. Some refused to go. Some were rejected. Murderers, women who died in childbirth, people who drowned. Their bodies never found. These became wandering spirits, causing trouble, possessing the living, spreading disease, required exorcism, professional ghost hunters, armed with spells and rituals. The story of Inanna's descent shows death's power. Even gods weren't immune. Inanna, goddess of love and war, decides to visit her sister Ereshkigal. Bad idea. She's stripped at each gate, arrives naked. Ereshkigal kills her, hangs her corpse on a hook. 3 days later, other gods rescue her. But someone must take her place. Death demands balance. She chooses her husband Dumuzi. He goes to the underworld. She returns. Even gods must respect death's rules. Gilgamesh's encounter with Enkidu's ghost is heartbreaking. After Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh won't accept it. He summons Enkidu's spirit, asks about the underworld. Enkidu warns him, "Don't ask, you don't want to know," but Gilgamesh insists. So Enkidu tells him, "The man with no sons eats garbage. The man who died in battle drinks clean water. The man whose corpse was unburied wanders restlessly. Death has hierarchies, based on how you died, how you were buried. Who remembers you? Suicide was complicated, not forbidden, but not encouraged. The dead who killed themselves went to Irkala like everyone else, but they were marked, different, isolated from other dead, neither punished nor accepted, eternal outsiders, which is why suicide was rare, bad enough to be dead, worse to be dead and alone. The absence of judgment is striking. No weighing of hearts, no paradise for the good, no special hell for the evil. Everyone got the same dusty darkness. Your actions in life affected this life, not the next. Be good because the gods might reward you now. Be evil and they might punish you now. But after death, everyone's equal. In misery. This shaped Sumerian ethics. Focus on this life. Build monuments. Have children. Create things that last. Because you won't. Your body will decay. Your spirit will fade. But your ziggurat might stand. Your children might remember. Your name might survive. That's the only immortality available. Memory, legacy, impact. Professional mourners were essential. Usually women. Trained in lamentation. They'd wail. Tear their clothes. Beat their chests. Scratch their faces. Performance grief. But real too. They channeled the community's sorrow. Gave it voice. Made it public. Shared. The dead deserved proper mourning. The living needed to mourn. The mourners made both possible. Cremation was rare, almost unknown. The body needed to be intact for the afterlife. Burning meant destruction, complete annihilation, no afterlife at all, reserved for the worst criminals or enemies. Deny them even the miserable existence of Irkala. Total erasure, the ultimate punishment. The afterlife evolved over time. Early Sumerian ideas were simple. Dead go down, live in dust. Later, influences from other cultures added complexity. Maybe heroes got better treatment. Maybe gods had their own section. Maybe there were different levels, but the core remained: death is inevitable. Afterlife is miserable. Focus on living. The Sumerians gave us our death anxiety. Before them, death was just death. They made it a place, a journey, a continued existence, created the questions we still ask. What happens after? Where do we go? Who remembers us? They didn't have good answers. Neither do we, but they started the conversation about mortality, about meaning, about what matters when nothing lasts. Sumerian art wasn't about beauty. It was about power, divine power, royal power, the power of permanence in a world of mud and mortality. Every statue, every relief, every decorated pot was a statement. We exist. We matter. We'll outlast you. Art as defiance against death and forgetting. The votive statues are the most haunting. Hundreds found in temples, small figures, huge eyes, hands clasped in prayer. These represented worshippers. Placed before the gods to pray eternally, the eyes are enormous, inlaid shell and lapis lazuli, staring, unblinking, forever watching the god, forever praying, because the person who commissioned it couldn't be in temple all day, but their statue could. The style is distinctive, not realistic, not trying to be. The Sumerians could carve realistic figures. We know because sometimes they did, but usually they chose stylization. Pottery evolved from functional to artistic. Early pots were simple, brown, undecorated, pure function. But by 3000 BCE, pottery was art. Painted designs, geometric patterns, animal figures. Some pots were so elaborate they couldn't be used. Display pieces, status symbols. The medium might be clay, but the message was wealth, Metalworking reached incredible heights. The gold helmet of Mescalamdua, beaten from a single sheet of gold, shaped to look like elaborate hair, every strand detailed, weighs almost 2 pounds. Imagine wearing that, the weight of gold pressing on your skull, the ultimate crown, proclaiming wealth, power, divine favour, or at least the ability to afford a really good goldsmith. Jewellery was complex, not just decoration, identity, status, protection, cylinder seals worn as necklaces, amulets against evil, pins showing professional affiliation, rings indicating marriage or office. Queen Puabi's jewellery is staggering. Gold wreaths, lapis necklaces, carnelian belts. She was buried wearing 40 pounds of jewellery. That's not fashion. That's armour. Against the poverty of death, music was everywhere. Work songs, religious hymns, love songs, drinking songs, war chants, lamentations. The Sumerians had a song for everything, and instruments to play them. Lyres, harps, drums, flutes, pipes, clappers, sistrums, some sophisticated. The silver lyre from Ur had 11 strings, different tensions, different tones, capable of complex music. We know what some songs sounded like, sort of. Cuneiform musical notation survives, the Hurrian hymns, marks indicating strings to pluck, in what order. Modern musicians have attempted reconstructions. It sounds strange, alien, not unpleasant, but not familiar. Music from a dead culture, notes from nowhere. The Epic of Gilgamesh was performed, not just read, sung, with musical accompaniment, different voices for different characters, sound effects, dramatic pauses. It was entertainment, education, religion, all combined. Public performance that bound communities, shared stories creating shared identity. Dance existed but left few traces. Some seals show figures in motion, arms raised, bodies bent, group formations, probably religious dances, possibly secular. We know there were professional dancers, mentioned in payment records, part of temple staff, royal entertainments, but we don't know the moves, the meanings, the music they moved to. Literature beyond Gilgamesh was rich. The Sumerian king list, not just names and dates. A story about legitimate rule, divine approval, the rise and fall of cities, propaganda disguised as history, but artfully done, creating narrative from chronology. Love poetry was surprisingly explicit. Your beer is sweet, but your love is sweeter. Your embrace is better than beer. That's tame. Others are graphic, describing body parts, sexual acts, desires. These weren't hidden. They were celebrated, copied in schools, recited at festivals. The Sumerians weren't prudish. Sex was life. Life was good. Poetry should reflect both. Proverbs revealed daily wisdom. A sweet word is everybody's friend. He who possesses much silver may be happy. He who possesses much barley may be glad. But he who has nothing can sleep. Social commentary, moral instruction, humour, preserved in collections, taught to children, the condensed wisdom of centuries. Lamentation literature was uniquely Sumerian. Elaborate poems mourning destroyed cities, dead kings, lost golden ages. The lamentation over the destruction of Ur is heartbreaking, describing the city's fall, the dead in streets, the temple's destruction, the gods' abandonment, beautiful poetry from horrible events, art from anguish. Games were art too, the royal game of Ur, a board game, race game like backgammon, beautiful boards, inlaid wood, decorated with lapis and shell, pieces of carved stone, not just entertainment, art objects, status symbols, found in royal tombs. The dead needed entertainment too. Architecture was the ultimate art, ziggurats reaching toward heaven, statements in brick. We are here, we matter, we can build mountains. The white temple of Uruk, covered in gypsum plaster, gleaming in sunlight, visible for miles. Architecture as advertisement for the city, the god, the civilization. The aesthetic was abundance. More was better. More decoration, more precious materials, more size, more everything. Empty space was wasted space. Every surface could carry meaning, pattern, image, text, horror vacui, fear of emptiness, fill everything, make everything mean something. But there was also subtlety. The way light played on carved stone, the rhythm of repeated patterns, the balance of compositions. These weren't primitive artists. They were masters working within conventions, creating beauty within constraints, making art that spoke to their world and still speaks to ours, across 5,000 years of silence. Civilizations don't usually die dramatically. They fade, slowly, painfully, like a person with a chronic disease, getting weaker, less capable, until one day they're gone and nobody's quite sure when the end actually happened. That's how Sumer died. Not with a bang, with a whimper that lasted centuries. The language went first. By 2000 BCE, more people spoke Akkadian than Sumerian. Kids in Sumerian cities grew up bilingual, then mostly Akkadian, then only Akkadian. Sumerian became what Latin would become, a dead language kept alive by priests and scribes, used in temples, in schools, in official documents, but not on the street, not at home, not in the heart. You can track it in the tablets. Personal letters from 2500 BCE are in Sumerian. By 2000 BCE, they're in Akkadian with Sumerian phrases, like an immigrant forgetting their mother tongue. By 1500 BCE, even scribes made mistakes in Sumerian. Grammatical errors. Wrong words. They were writing in a language they didn't really speak, going through motions, maintaining traditions they didn't understand. The soil was dying too. 3,000 years of irrigation had poisoned it. Every time water evaporates, it leaves salt. Little bit each year. Barely noticeable. But it accumulates. By 2100 BCE, wheat wouldn't grow in southern Mesopotamia anymore. Too much salt. They switched to barley. More salt-tolerant. But lower yields. Less nutrition. By 1700 BCE, even barley struggled. Fields that once fed cities could barely feed villages. The evidence is in the tax records, boring tablets listing grain payments. But they tell a story. In 2400 BCE, fields near Lagash yielded 2,500 litres of barley per hectare. By 2100 BCE, 1,500 litres. By 1700 BCE, 900 litres. The land was dying, and everyone knew it. But what could they do? Stop irrigating? Then they'd starve immediately instead of slowly. Climate change made everything worse. The 4.2 kilo-year event. Global cooling around 2200 BCE. Reduced rainfall. Irregular floods. The predictable cycle that enabled Sumerian agriculture broke down. Some years, massive floods destroyed everything. Other years, drought killed crops. The gods seemed angry, or insane, or absent. Population shifted north, where the soil was less salty. Where rainfall was more reliable, Babylon rose as Ur fell. Assyria grew as Sumer shrank. It wasn't conquest. It was migration. Slow, steady, families moving for better land. Better opportunities, better futures. Leaving behind cities their ancestors built, temples their gods inhabited, graves they'd never visit again. The Amorites kept coming, not invading, just arriving. Desert nomads looking for grazing land, settling in abandoned areas, marrying local women, having children who were half Sumerian, half Amorite. Then those children married, had children. Within generations, who could say who was Sumerian, who was Amorite, who was something new? Political fragmentation accelerated the decline. After Ur III fell, no single power controlled Sumer. Isin, Larsa, Uruk, each claimed supremacy. None achieved it. They fought constantly, destroying each other's canals, burning fields, taking slaves, weakening everyone, making them vulnerable to outside powers, to Babylon, to Elam, to anyone organized enough to conquer exhausted cities. The rise of Babylon changed everything. Hammurabi, around 1750 BCE united Mesopotamia. But under Babylonian rule, Babylonian law, Babylonian gods, Marduk became supreme deity, Sumerian gods became his servants, their myths rewritten, their temples subordinated, Sumerian culture absorbed, digested, transformed into something else. Trade routes shifted. The Persian Gulf silted up. Harbours that once welcomed ships from India became mudflats. Merchants went elsewhere, to Babylon, to marry, to cities on the Mediterranean. The great merchant houses of Ur closed. One by one, their tablets stop appearing in the archaeological record. Businesses that lasted centuries, gone. Technology stagnated. The Sumerians invented writing, the wheel, bronze working, irrigation, mathematics, astronomy. But after 2500 BCE, very little. They refined existing technologies, but didn't create new ones. Meanwhile, others were innovating. Ironworking, alphabets, new military tactics. The Sumerians were still using bronze when others had iron, still writing in cuneiform when others had alphabets. Social inequality became unsustainable. By 2000 BCE, debt slavery was epidemic. Farmers borrowed seed grain, couldn't repay after bad harvests, became slaves. Their land went to creditors. Wealth concentrated in fewer hands. The rich got richer. The poor got enslaved. Social cohesion collapsed. Why defend a city that enslaved you? Why fight for kings who oppressed you? Religious authority crumbled. The gods had promised protection, prosperity, victory, but cities fell, harvests failed, enemies triumphed. Either the gods were weak, or they didn't care, or they didn't exist. People still performed rituals, but mechanically, without faith, going through motions, empty gestures to absent deities. The last Sumerian literary text dates to around 1750 BCE. After that, silence. No new stories, no new hymns, no new prayers, just copies of old texts, each generation copying less accurately, understanding less, until even scribes couldn't read the oldest tablets, the wisdom of millennia becoming incomprehensible marks on clay. Cities emptied. Uruk, once 50,000 people, shrank to 5,000, then 1,000, then a village, then nothing, just hells. Mounds of mud brick slowly eroding. Shepherds grazing sheep where kings once ruled, using ancient bricks to build sheep pens. The ziggurat of Ur became a landmark, not a temple, just a big hill in the desert. The last cuneiform tablet was written around 100 CE. In a temple in Babylon, astronomical observation, mechanical, formulaic, the last gasp of a 3,000-year tradition. After that, nothing. The script died, the language died, the culture died, completely. So thoroughly that 700 years later nobody knew Sumerians had existed. Environmental destruction was complete. Southern Mesopotamia became desert, salt desert. Where the first cities rose, nothing grew. The Tigris and Euphrates changed course, abandoning ancient channels. But ideas survived. Laws, mathematics, astronomy, literature, all preserved in later cultures. Babylonian, Assyrian, Persian, Greek, Roman, Islamic, European. The Sumerians died, but their inventions lived, evolved, spread. Every time you divide an hour into 60 minutes, you're using Sumerian math. Every time you read a book, you're using their invention. They achieved immortality, just not the kind they expected. The irony is perfect. They built ziggurats to last forever. They crumbled. They wrote stories about immortality. They died. They created gods to protect them. The gods failed, but their administrative tablets, their school exercises, their complaint letters, those survived, buried in collapsed buildings, waiting for archaeologists. The mundane outlasted the monumental. By 1500 BCE, Sumerian meant nothing. It was just a place name, like saying Atlantis, a mythical past, golden age, when gods walked the earth, when kings lived centuries, when cities were new, Nobody identified as Sumerian. Nobody spoke Sumerian. Nobody remembered Sumer as it really was. Just stories. Getting vaguer. More mythical. Less real. Until even the stories were forgotten. The last people who could read Sumerian were Babylonian priests, keeping ancient rituals alive. But even they were just going through motions, pronouncing words they didn't understand, performing rites whose meaning was lost. Like Catholic priests saying Latin Mass to congregations who don't speak Latin. Form without content, tradition without comprehension. Look at your watch. The 12 hours, the 60 minutes, the 60 seconds. That's Sumerian. They divided the day into 12 double hours 5,000 years ago. We still use their system. Every clock on Earth ticks to Sumerian time. Every GPS coordinate, every astronomical calculation, based on their base 60 mathematics. We've been to the moon using Sumerian math. The 7-day week? Sumerian! They noticed 7 celestial bodies that moved against the stars. Sun, moon, 5 visible planets. Each got a day, Sunday, Moon Day, Mars Day, Mercury Day, Jupiter Day, Venus Day, Saturn Day. The names changed, different languages, different gods, but the structure remained. 7 days. Forever. Because Sumerians could count to 7. Every legal system traces back to them. The idea that laws should be written, public, consistent, that justice isn't personal revenge, that courts should hear evidence, that contracts are binding, that property can be owned, sold, inherited. These aren't natural ideas. Someone had to invent them. The Sumerians did. In Ur, in Uruk, in Lagash, creating the framework every civilization copied. Writing itself. The idea that marks can represent sounds. That sounds can represent ideas. That ideas can be preserved outside human memory. Every book, every email, every text message, every line of code, all descendants of Sumerian cuneiform. Those first accountants counting sheep. They created external memory, changed human consciousness, made accumulated knowledge possible, made us what we are. Cities. The very concept, thousands of strangers living together, specialized labor, central administration, public works, districts, markets, temples, palaces, the urban blueprint, started in Sumer, spread worldwide, Beijing, London, New York, all following patterns established in Uruk, different materials, same principles, humans living in dense communities, creating civilization through proximity, school systems, standardized curriculum, grades, discipline, homework, testing. The Sumerians invented it all. The Edaba, tablet house, where boys learn to write. Same exercises everywhere. Same texts, same methods, creating standardized knowledge, shared culture, common references. Every classroom on Earth echoes those first Sumerian schools. Teachers with sticks, students with tablets, learning through repetition, banking, interest, credit, investment, loans. The temples were the first banks, storing wealth, lending at interest, creating credit systems, enabling commerce beyond barter, every Wall Street transaction, every mortgage, every credit card, traces back to Sumerian temples, priests calculating compound interest, merchants borrowing for trade expeditions, the birth of finance capitalism, literature's basic forms, epic, hymn, proverb, lament, love song, wisdom literature. They created the templates. Gilgamesh established the hero's journey, 3,000 years before Homer. Their hymns created religious poetry. Their proverbs condensed wisdom. Their laments expressed communal grief. Every story structure, every genre, has Sumerian DNA. The calendar. Reconciling lunar months with solar years. Leap months. Seasonal festivals. Agricultural timing. They solved problems every agricultural society faces. When to plant, when to harvest, when to celebrate. Their solutions spread, evolved. But the core insight remained. Time can be measured, standardized, shared, made communal. Bureaucracy. Yes, they invented that too. Standardized procedures, record keeping, hierarchical organization, specialized departments, official titles, stamps and seals, forms and applications, every government department, every corporate structure, every administrative system. Follows patterns they established. For better or worse, they created organizational technology, the ability to coordinate thousands of people toward common goals. Beer, commercial brewing, standardized production, quality grades, distribution systems. The Sumerians didn't invent beer, but they industrialized it, made it central to civilization, payment for workers, offering for gods, social lubricant, dietary staple, every brewery on earth, every bar, every beer commercial. Continues tradition started in Sumerian taverns. The concept of progress. Before Sumer, time was cyclical. Eternal return, same patterns forever. But Sumerians believed in improvement, building higher ziggurats, digging longer canals, writing better laws. They introduced linear time, historical consciousness, the idea that tomorrow could be better than today, that human effort could improve conditions. Revolutionary concept, still controversial. Professional specialization. Before cities, everyone was a generalist, farmer, builder, craftsman, hunter, everything. Cities allowed specialization. Just a potter, just a scribe, just a merchant. Getting really good at one thing, trading expertise for other needs, the foundation of complex economy, of technological advancement, of civilization itself. Standard measurements, weight, volume, length, area, consistent across regions, enabling trade, construction, taxation, fair exchange, the shekel, the cubit, the gur, spread throughout the ancient world, evolved into modern systems, but the principle remained. Measurement must be standardized, shared, trusted, or civilization collapses. Urban planning, streets, districts, drainage, zoning, public spaces. They figured out how cities should be organized. Through trial and error, painful experience, deadly mistakes. But they learned, created patterns, industrial districts separate from residential, markets near temples, administrative centers accessible but protected. Every city planner, every zoning board, every urban designer uses principles Sumerians discovered. International trade, not just trading with neighbors, but long-distance commerce, standardized weights, letters of credit, commercial law, trade agreements. They created the infrastructure of global commerce, the idea that people thousands of miles apart could do business, trust each other, profit together. The first global economy in the Bronze Age. Metallurgy, not just using metal, but understanding it, alloying bronze, controlling temperature, creating different hardnesses for different purposes, mass production, quality control. They turned metalworking from craft to science, created the Bronze Age, enabled everything that followed. Iron, steel, industry, technology, all building on Sumerian foundations. Medicine as profession, not just folk healing, but systematic observation, recording symptoms, testing treatments, training specialists, creating medical literature, establishing medical ethics, medical law, the idea that healing could be studied, improved, taught, professionalized. Every medical school, every hospital, every clinical trial continues traditions they started, the idea of history. Before Sumer, there was only myth, eternal present, gods and heroes outside time. Sumerians created historical consciousness, dating events, recording reigns, preserving records, creating chronology, the idea that the past happened in specific order, can be studied, learned from. They invented the past as a concept, as a resource, as identity. Most fundamentally, they gave us the idea of civilization itself. that humans could transcend tribalism, create something larger, more complex, more capable, that strangers could cooperate, that diversity could be strength, that collective effort could achieve impossible things, build cities, create writing, establish justice, preserve knowledge, reach toward heaven, even if made of mud. We are all Sumerians, every aspect of civilized life, every institution, every technology, every social structure, traces back to them, those first city builders, first writers, first lawmakers. They created the template. We're still following it, modified, evolved, improved, but essentially the same. Humans living in cities, writing thoughts, following laws, trading goods, seeking meaning, building toward heaven, even though we're made of mud, just like them. For almost 2,000 years, Sumer didn't exist. Not in human memory anyway. The cities were mounds in the desert. The tablets were buried in dirt. The language was dead. Completely dead. Nobody could read cuneiform. Nobody knew Sumerians had existed. The Bible mentioned Ur of the Chaldees, Abraham's birthplace. But Chaldees were Babylonians, not Sumerians. Even that connection was lost. The rediscovery started with frustration. European scholars in the 1700s were obsessed with the Bible, wanted to prove it historically. Find Noah's Ark, the Tower of Babel, Abraham's hometown. They went to Mesopotamia looking for biblical sites, found mysterious mounds, tells, local Arabs called them, artificial hills full of pottery shards and weird bricks with strange markings. Paul-Émile Botta went looking for Nineveh in 1843, French consul in Mosul, amateur archaeologist, professional treasure hunter. He started digging at Khorsabad, found massive stone reliefs, winged bulls, battle scenes, and inscriptions. Lots of inscriptions. In 3 languages. One was Old Persian. Scholars could sort of read that. One was Babylonian. They recognized it but couldn't read it. The third was complete mystery. Henry Rawlinson cracked the code. A British army officer, stationed in Persia, rock climber, linguist, completely insane. He found the Behistun inscription, carved on a cliff face, 300 feet up. He climbed it, hung from ropes, copied the text, nearly died multiple times, but got it. The same text in 3 languages, Old Persian, which he could read, Babylonian, which he was learning, and that mystery language. By comparing the 3 versions, he decoded cuneiform, published his translation in 1850. Suddenly, thousands of tablets could be read, and they mentioned Sumerians a lot, but as ancient people. Even to the Babylonians and Assyrians, Sumerians were ancient history, a lost civilization that came before, that invented writing. But where were the Sumerian sites? The Assyrian cities were in northern Iraq. Babylon was in central Iraq. Logic said Sumerians should be south, in the desert, where nothing grew, where nobody lived, just mysterious mounds, hundreds of them, waiting. Leonard Woolley changed everything. A British archaeologist, trained in Egypt. Sent to Ur in 1922, everybody expected another boring dig, some pottery, maybe some tablets. Instead, he found royal tombs. Intact royal tombs, gold, jewels, harps, weapons, and bodies. Lots of bodies. Servants following rulers into death. Spectacular finds that rivaled Tutankhamun's tomb discovered the same year. The media went crazy. Sumerian gold, death pits of Ur, Abraham's city found. Woolley was smart. He courted publicity, sent dramatic telegrams, staged photo opportunities, made Sumer sexy, mysterious, romantic. The public loved it. Museums wanted artifacts. Universities funded expeditions. The race to excavate Sumer was on. But Woolley also did serious archaeology, careful excavation, detailed recording. He found the flood layer, 8 feet of clean silt between occupation levels, announced he'd found evidence of Noah's flood, headlines worldwide. Later digs showed multiple floods at different times, not one biblical deluge. but Woolley knew how to sell archaeology to the public. The University of Pennsylvania dug at Nippur, found the temple library, thousands of tablets, school texts, literary works, the Sumerian king list, creation myths, flood stories, medical texts, mathematical problems, the mother lode of Sumerian literature. Suddenly we could read their thoughts, hear their voices, understand their world. German expeditions to Uruk found the oldest writing, tablets from 3200 BCE, proto-cuneiform, pictures becoming symbols. The actual moment writing was invented. Layer by layer they uncovered the growth of the world's first city, from village to metropolis, all documented, all preserved in mud, brick and clay tablets. Iraqi archaeologists brought different perspectives. This was their heritage, their ancestors. The Habakir, Fuad Safar, Vehnam Abu al-Suf. They excavated Tel Harmel, Eridu. Tel Sawan found things foreign archaeologists missed. Subtle continuities between ancient Sumer and modern Iraq. Irrigation techniques still used, building methods still practiced, words still spoken. The decipherment of Sumerian language was brutal. It's a language isolate, not related to anything else, no cognates to help. Just patterns, grammar slowly emerging from thousands of tablets. Samuel Noah Kramer spent his life translating Sumerian literature. Thorkild Jacobson interpreted their religion. Benno Landsberger explained their worldview. Slowly, painfully, word by word, Sumer came back to life. Then came tragedy. The Gulf War, the Iraq War, the rise of ISIS. Looting became industrial. Thousands of sites bulldozed, tablets sold on the black market, museums emptied. The Iraq National Museum, holding priceless Sumerian artifacts, looted in 2003. Some pieces recovered, many still missing, erased again, this time by modern warfare. Satellite archaeology offers hope. Sarah Parkak, using satellite imagery, identifying unexcavated sites, thousands of them, tells that look like natural hills from the ground. But from space, obviously artificial, regular shapes, consistent sizes, ancient cities waiting underground, more Sumerian sites than archaeologists could excavate in centuries. Digital Humanities changes everything. Cuneiform Digital Library Initiative, putting tablets online, high-resolution images, translations, commentaries, available worldwide, free. No longer locked in museum basements. Anyone can study them. AI learning to read cuneiform. Faster than humans, finding patterns humans missed. Reconstructing broken tablets. Translating faster than ever. But we've barely scratched the surface, literally. Most tells are unexcavated. Even excavated sites we've only dug small percentages. Maybe 10% excavated. Uruk, less than 5%. Eridu, a few trenches. Thousands of tablets still underground. Millions, maybe. Entire libraries. Lost literature. Unknown history. Waiting. Modern technology reveals hidden details. CT scanning tablets without opening clay envelopes. Spectrographic analysis of pottery. DNA analysis of ancient remains. Isotope analysis showing where people came from, what they ate, how they lived. Every year, new techniques, new discoveries, new understanding. The tragedy is time. Sites are deteriorating, salt erosion, wind damage, rising water tables, climate change, modern development, dams flooding ancient sites, cities expanding over tells, farmers leveling mounds for fields. Every day, irreplaceable history disappears. Race against time, document everything, save what we can before it's gone forever. So here we are, 5,000 years after Sumer invented civilization, using their mathematics, living in cities they imagined, following laws they created, writing with their invention, and mostly we don't know it, don't think about it, take it all for granted, as if cities always existed, writing always existed, laws always existed, but they didn't. Someone had to invent them, and they did, in the mud between two rivers. The Sumerians asked the big questions first. How should strangers live together? they said, with laws. Written down, publicly known, fairly enforced. How should we organize society? They said, with specialization, different people doing different jobs, trading skills, creating complexity through cooperation. How should we preserve knowledge? They said, through writing, external memory, accumulated wisdom, each generation building on the last. They made the mistakes first too. Environmental destruction through salinization. They showed us what happens when you ignore ecological limits. Social inequality becoming unsustainable. They showed us how concentration of wealth destroys civilizations. Religious authority corrupted by power. They showed us why church and state should separate. All our mistakes they made first. All our lessons they learned first. Usually the hard way. What would they think of us? These first city builders, first writers, first lawmakers. Would they recognize their descendants? 7 billion of us now, living in cities that dwarf Uruk, writing constantly, not on clay, on screens, on clouds, in light itself. Our laws filling libraries, our mathematics reaching to quantum mechanics, our astronomy seeing the universe's edge. Would they be proud or horrified? They wanted immortality, searched for it desperately. Gilgamesh crossing the world, kings building ziggurats, priests performing rituals, all seeking to escape death, to last forever. And in a way they succeeded. Not their bodies, not their cities, not even their language, but their ideas. Every fundamental innovation of civilization, they live in those, immortal in the most unexpected way. We face their challenges, but magnified. They had to figure out how thousands could live together. We have billions. They worried about local environmental damage. We face global climate change. They dealt with inequality in cities. We have inequality between continents. Their weapons could destroy cities. Ours can destroy the planet. Same problems, exponentially scaled. But we have advantages they didn't. We can learn from their mistakes, see patterns in their collapse, understand consequences they couldn't foresee. We have their 5,000 years of accumulated wisdom, plus everything since, every civilization's successes and failures, all documented, all available, if we choose to learn. The tension between individual and collective that tortured them still tortures us. How much freedom? How much order? They never found the perfect balance. Neither have we, but they proved it was possible, that humans could transcend tribalism, create something larger, even if imperfect, even if temporary. The attempt matters. The trying matters. The building toward something better matters. Their greatest insight was that civilization is artificial, not natural, not inevitable. Something humans create, maintain, improve, or destroy. It requires constant effort, constant negotiation, constant reinvention. Let it slide, and it collapses, into tribalism, into chaos, into the mud it came from. They learned this, forgot it, learned it again. So do we. Look at any modern city. The bones are Sumerian. Central business district. That's the temple complex, government buildings. That's the palace, markets, residential neighborhoods, industrial zones, all following patterns established in Uruk, modified, elaborated, but essentially the same. Human organization crystallized into architecture, function becoming form. The digital revolution is just another kind of writing. Marks representing sounds, representing ideas. But now the marks are electrical. The tablets are silicon. The styluses are keyboards. The clay is code. But it's still writing. Still external memory. Still the preservation and transmission of thought. The Sumerians would understand immediately. Different medium, same magic. Their gods failed them. Enlil didn't prevent invasion. Inanna didn't ensure fertility. Enki didn't provide wisdom when needed. But maybe the gods were metaphors for forces they sensed but couldn't name. Market forces, environmental limits, social dynamics, political power. The gods were how they understood complex systems. We use different words, same mysteries. Climate change ended them. Will it end us? They couldn't see it coming, slow salinization, gradual degradation, until too late. We can see ours coming, have the science, have the data, have the warnings, but do we have the wisdom, the will, the ability to act collectively, to sacrifice individually for collective survival? They didn't. Do we? In the end, the Sumerians gave us everything and nothing. Everything because all civilization builds on their foundation. Nothing because each generation must recreate civilization anew, learn the same lessons, make the same mistakes, face the same choices, build our own cities, write our own laws, create our own meaning. They can't do it for us. They can only show it's possible. Their last gift might be their disappearance, showing that civilizations die, completely, permanently, that nothing is guaranteed, no city eternal, no empire forever, no culture immortal. Everything ends, but also everything leaves traces, seeds, ideas, influences. The Sumerians died, but we're all their children, every human living in a city, following laws, using writing. We're what they became. 5,000 years from now, what will remain of us? Will future archaeologists dig through our ruins, find our hard drives, decode our languages, wonder at our stupidity, marvel at our achievements? Or will we be completely forgotten, like the Sumerians were, until someone accidentally finds us and wonders, who were these people? What did they dream? What did they fear? What did they love? The Sumerians remind us that we're not the first, won't be the last. We're just another experiment in civilization, another attempt to answer the same questions. How should we live together? What should we value? What should we create? What should we preserve? They gave us their answers. Now we must find our own, using their tools, building on their foundation, but creating something new, something ours, something that might last, or might not, but worth trying, always worth trying, because that's what humans do. We build cities from mud, create meaning from marks, make laws from arguments, generate wealth from trade, construct gods from fears and hopes, tell stories about heroes who fail but keep trying. We're all Sumerians, all citizens of that first city, all children of that first civilization, all heirs to that first attempt to be more than wandering animals, to be human, fully human, which means civilized, which means complicated, which means magnificent and terrible, which means us.